Today we pore over the Scribe of the Damned's ancient texts on the history of the infernal fiends of the Nine Hells, to provide an unprecedented level of discovery sure to enlighten even the most scholarly of infernal sages. From their origins and role in the Nine Hells to their stratum in the infernal caste system, as well as some deeply obscure, hidden secrets that may well surprise you. All culminating in the creation of a single version-agnostic master hierarchy of every rank-and-file devil across every edition from over 50 years of Dungeons & Dragons. This is our definitive work on the infernal power structures and the devils of the Nine Hells, and it's going to be a long one. The devils you know, and some you may not, right now on Riches and Liches. It has been a long time coming, but we finally reach an important milestone, as today we unveil the full infernal hierarchy of 32 rank-and-file devils, along with their many variants that will push this volume to nearly 40 infernal fiends. This, along with the already published Volume 6 and 6.5 updates on the Outlander devils, links below, will give you a complete 360-degree view of all the Barbazu fiends across all versions of Dungeons & Dragons, over 70 devils in total. I must start by providing a clear warning. This volume is long and dense, eclipsing the 3-hour mark. And while the goal is to go deep into the lore, it's also important to me personally that this volume be accessible to those just starting their own journey of infernal studies, or even those just new to Dungeons & Dragons. As such, the first 5 chapters include framing context and information on things like the types of fiends, the blood war, the structure of the hells, and the canonical promotion rules that are, in my opinion, required of any series that aims to be definitive. But I know some of you just want to get to the ranking, so if you don't want any of that context, there are chapter markers below for each specific devil type. And if you'd like, you can also skip ahead to Chapter 6 for the promotion rules, or Chapter 8, where we start the hierarchical rankings. As this video is free of any outside sponsors, please allow me a moment to tell you about a PDF resource I've created as a companion to this 3-hour volume on Hell's Hierarchy that's available over on my Patreon, which you can join for free. This nearly 30-page supplemental resource includes the full master hierarchy, as well as supporting images for each devil and lore summaries for nearly 70 devil types, plus descriptions and points of interest for each of Hell's 9 layers, Outlander devil rankings, plus pages of thematic homebrew content focused specifically on these infernal fiends. I really think this will be a very handy resource for any DMs, world builders, or just simply fans of the lore out there. If you like the content I provide, want to support my work, and help me keep these volumes sponsor-free, I think this is a win-win for everyone, so maybe check it out and tell me what you think. And finally, I think many of you will be very happy to hear with the conclusion of this volume, our path is now cleared to begin our dedicated profiles on each of the 9 layers of hell, starting with Avernus, next in Volume 8. Okay, settle in, we're going on the deepest of deep dives, and you've been warned about the length. Our extended and definitive volume, number 7 in our iconic lore series on the 9 Hells, the Hierarchy of Hell. If you are just starting your discovery of devil kind, then there are some basic but critically important facts you should know. Facts that will help you better consume all this volume offers, and in doing so, maybe keep you alive should you happen to journey into the outer planes or these 9 hells. At its most basic, we can group the fiends of Dungeons & Dragons into 3 categories: devils, demons, and daemons. While they are all fiendishly evil, they are also very different. And I have to admit I am one of those guys that gets a bit rankled when people conflate demons and devils as the interchangeable bad guys. Yes, they both can be found in shades of crimson. Both may have wings and horns and come from a very bad place, often but not always with lots of fire and/or brimstone. But while they can at times have their visual similarities, from an ideological perspective they are the most sinister version of apples and oranges. and it might surprise you to learn that the lawful devils have far more in common with the angels of Mount Celestia than the chaotic and impulsive demons of the endless abyss. They are, by the purest definition of the words, diametrically opposed. Devils and demons in particular are mortal enemies, the proverbial divide not of good and evil, but of order and chaos, law and anarchy, and they make up the core elements of the eternal and unending blood war. The blood war itself is the most fascinating of topics in all of Dungeons & Dragons, and in my opinion it's required study for anyone interested in any of the Fiends. In fact, I have a recent and well-received video volume fully dedicated to this most compelling and ongoing war that I would encourage you to check out at some point just to better understand the motives and socio-political drivers of all three fiendish types. Link below if you'd like to check that out. In short, true devils, or Barbazu, are always lawful, originate or reside in the hells, also called the Nine Hells, the infernal realms, and uniquely and originating from the 2nd edition Planescape setting, Beator. The vast majority of infernal motives stem from and or serve the interests of Hell's soul economy, the axiomatic lifeblood that powers the Nine Hells and all that they do. Conversely, the demons, or the Tanar'ri, are non-ordered, chaotic, and spawn from the bottomless plane of infinite layers called the Abyss. Demons are more often than not unfairly painted with the widest possible brush, one that colors them as mindless creatures who act with arbitrary, undisciplined chaos, violence, and destruction. Heck, I've been guilty of this myself in the past. The truth, however, is far more complex, and the demons are no more mindless than the infernal devils. Explaining the demonic ideology properly requires far more nuance and time that only a dedicated volume can provide. But until I create that video, just know that the core Tanar'ri ideal is one of personal freedoms, where they're valued in favor of and even at the cost of social order, lawful codes, and equally important, the immediate wants and desires of self over the needs of others, even their own kind. And while this often manifests itself in wanton destruction, making them no less unpredictable or dangerous, the underlying cause does have depth and purpose, something I hope to explore when I start a new series just like this infernal one, but focused on the abyssal Tanar'ri. That said, in most scenarios that a brave hero such as yourself might find yourself in, you would do well to remember that your odds of surviving an encounter with a devil are likely better than you realize, at least in the short term, while the unpredictability of a demon introduces you to a much wider range of dangers, born directly from that individual demon's varied personal wants and desires that are not in any way driven by a well-understood doctrine, as you might find with a devil. And then there are the daemons, mostly flying under the Blood War radar, a third fiendish type who excel at the art of playing both sides of this ideologic divide for profit and their own most selfish of interests. Almost universally neutral evil, daemons can be found across all the lower planes. Daemons are also referred to as Yugoloths, or other forms of Loths, such as the Master Navigators of the River Styx, the Marinoloths, the Boatmen. Just don't confuse them with Lolth, the Spider Queen Dark Goddess of the Demon Web Pits. That would be a costly and likely final mistake. Daemons are widely viewed as greedy, self-serving mercenary fiends who sell their wide range of services to the highest bidder. And none of that is untrue. In fact, it is widely accepted among the wisest of Candlekeep scholars that Yugoloths are perhaps the single most selfish race in all the multiverse. However, it can also be said that, at least to some degree, the demons hold the power to significantly influence the crimson tides of this war. And if you listen to any daemon retell their own cultural history, they will insist they are, point of fact, the very architects who created the Blood War and whose leaders continue to orchestrate the conflict's ebb and flow to this day. Now, it must be said that most non-Yugoloths count those as tall tales of fantasy and their own self-aggrandizing, a well-known trait of their kind, but it is interesting nonetheless. Indeed, the Yugoloths too are deserving of their own volume of study, but alas, that is not for today. So adventurers, if you get nothing else from this chapter, know that fiendish identification is important. While enough coin can almost certainly buy you favor with a daemon, and you can perhaps bargain for your life with a devil, with demons, the outcome is both unknown and unreliable, and in many cases, you may well find your only options are fight or flight. A significant historical driver in the hierarchical nature of the Nine Hells is that ongoing and eternal blood war, the brutal conflict between the Barbazu of the Nine Hells and the Tanar'ri of the Abyssal Forces. As mentioned in the last chapter, there's already a dedicated video on all the intricacies of the blood war, so my brief comments here will only serve the infernal hierarchy, which is of course our focus today. The Blood War provides an important backdrop to Hell's rigid hierarchy, coloring the broader context for understanding the critical need for peak efficiency, specifically as it relates to the infernal legions that march in the name of lawful evil, as well as their infernal generals and archdevil masters who each struggle to maintain their dominions as well as a cosmic balance, all amid an unending assault by the abyssal and infinite forces of chaos. Unlike the chaotic Tanar'ri of the Abyss, the lawful Barbazu armies are not endless, and because of this, the Nine Hells must operate under a rigid hierarchy, one that is characterized by ultimate order, disciplined behavior, and clear distinctions between the many different levels of power, roles, and responsibility. But discipline and order among the lawful ecology of the Nine Hells means this hierarchy is also hallmarked by ruthless competition and relentless ambition. This yields a caste system designed to provide a sharp level of control of lower-ranked devils, fiends who must walk a fine line of performing at a level that prevents their punishment or demotion, while still encouraging their own advancement by promotion, yet doing so in a way that does not threaten the ambition or prospects of the always manipulative devils ranked above them. Being a lesser fiend is a tough afterlife, and one I don't recommend. But this is by design, all part of the grand strategy of the Lord of Lies, knowing full well for all its benefits to efficiency and execution, that this delicate balance invites a level of political strife, lies, manipulation, and scheming not seen to this degree on any of the other planes. Well, except maybe the material plane, but that's a subject for another time, place, and channel. More than ever, I'll take the politics of the Nine Hells over real-world politics any day. So, now that you know the importance of this grand overarching hierarchy, we must next gain an understanding of how that structure functions, not only to best frame our discussions today, but also to help those joining us that may just be starting their own infernal discoveries. At the top, yet ironically residing in the deepest part of the Nine Hells, Asmodeus is the undisputed sovereign ruler of the Nine Hells, despite documented and likely many undocumented attempts to usurp his throne. Asmodeus is the original and only ruler the Nine Hells has ever known, and as of 4th edition, deified as a godlike entity. As a preemptive strike, I want to address a theory that likely has wise veteran lore scholars heading to the comments as I speak. That theory is that Lucifer and/or Satan were actually the original rulers of Hell before Asmodeus. I will acknowledge that the earliest editions of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, particularly fueled by a 1979 article entitled Politics of Hell, found in Dragon Magazine number 28, did allude to a figure of Lucifer or Satan ruling over Hell before being deposed by Asmodeus. Although it must be pointed out, even in that AD&D setting, that was not canon, a fact that is undisputed by the author's very note prefacing the article stating exactly that. However, this theoretical origin concept was further hinted at in the Serpents of Law origin story, as I covered in Volume 2 of this very series, but again, these ideas were never established officially as canonical. And then starting with the 3rd edition, Asmodeus' origin as the only ruler of the Nine Hells was solidified as the Serpents of Law origin story was replaced or retconned in favor of the Pact Primeval. Regardless, at the end of the day, it's all a matter of your own interpretation. For example, I have always personally regarded Asmodeus as simply the D&D analog to those more real-world, biblical rulers of hell. And that is one of the more beautiful facets of this game, as you get to choose, adopt, or even create and control the narrative of your world. If you have your own thoughts on this, I'd love to read them in the comments, as I suspect I will go a bit deeper and incorporate them when we cover the 9th layer of Hell Nessus in a future video. That out of the way, beneath Asmodeus in this inverted bottom-up corporate ladder are his named archdukes and archduchesses, each ruling one of the other 8 planes of hell. There has been much change across many, but not all of these layers, through political intrigue, strife, and outright rebellion, and we will go into all those histrionics starting in Volume 8. As we descend in rank, we also have a number of dukes and duchesses, some dedicated to and serving a particular archdevil on one of these 9 layers. From consorts to generals, they are named, have a rich history, and wield various levels of unique power and influence across the hells. Many of these powerful but subordinate devils rule vast swaths of territory within their respective layers and/or command substantial legions of infernal soldiers. However, they are all ultimately subservient to the layer's ruler, from whom they derive their power and authority. Still others exist that have been demoted, punished, or worse, named but still powerful outlaw fiends, exiled to roam the 9 hells and lower planes, many of them plotting their return. Yes, I'm looking right at you, Garyon. And finally, there are yet others of curious note, believed to be banished, cast out of hell entirely, whereabouts unknown, or even dead. These too will all be covered in future volumes. So my dedicated task today as a lore archaeologist is to gather all the canonical devils and admittedly break away from the 5e published works to create a single master of all devils. And I understand that for some DMs and world builders, you may feel like you're straying too far from a canonical model. However, it must be acknowledged that by WotC's own public comments on what is and is not canon, even the 5th edition Monster Manual's version of the hierarchy on page 67 is no longer canon. As I touched upon in Volume 6 on this series, if a devil type was ever officially introduced into the game and not officially removed, then that devil type still exists. It didn't just disappear. In these 3 volumes, we're profiling over 70 devils, and just because approximately 50 of them have not been printed in a 5e resource book does not mean that they just disappeared or went extinct. To illustrate my point, let's follow the logic out for just a bit. If you choose to strictly adhere to 5th edition lore, then canonically, from the 2014 launch of the 5e Monster Manual, the entirety of the 9 hells was populated with a total of 11 devil types listed in that 5e Monster Manual. Until, of course, 4 years later in 2018 when they added 3 more, and then again in 2021 when they brought in the fully retconned Abishai and its variants to 5e. These are all devils from previous versions, yet they were not included until many years later. And today, well over a decade after the 5e launch, we have only 16 devil types, which means even excluding variants, there are just shy of 50 additional devils missing. 50 devil types that did not suddenly become extinct. The key takeaway is that these publications don't revive devils, or any creature for that matter, because they've always existed. So accepting our hierarchy should not be any great leap. In fact, to my way of thinking, it's the only logical conclusion you can reach for such omissions, and is easily justified and neatly tied into the lore. Once again, I will quote the illustrious and gone too soon Carl Sagan when I say that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Now, if and when a new official sourcebook is published in the future, one that clearly and officially states that a specific devil type has been eradicated or is otherwise now extinct, well then that's a different situation entirely, and one I would take far more seriously. But as it stands, and of course it's up to you to decide, but for my table, any creature introduced remains until and unless explicitly stated otherwise. That strikes me as the most obvious, and so it is the principle that applies to our discoveries today. Okay, but why do we need a single version-agnostic hierarchy that spans across all versions of the game? Why not just use the 11 or 16 devils provided in 5e? Well, you certainly can if you so choose, but for me the answer is consistency and choice. The only thing consistent about devils in their rankings across the many versions of Dungeons & Dragons is their inconsistency, and the hierarchy is well known to change with nearly every update. Heck, we even see changes mid-version, 3 so far in 5th edition. For example, in previous versions of Dungeons & Dragons, a Lemure would typically be promoted to a Spinagon. That was canon. But imps became officially part of the Barbazu hierarchy with 5th edition. So if you crack open your monster manual, you will see that on page 67, the typical, canonical promotion path from Lemure would now be to that of an imp, a very new development from past versions. But before you lock that in as the gospel according to 5th edition, crack open the even more recently published Descent into Avernus update, and take a look on page 212. Here we can see the hierarchy now lists the Nupperibo, widely considered to fall out of this hierarchy altogether in versions past, now as the next step in rank. And this means if you don't own or are even aware of what is, for all intents and purposes, an adventure module, not a DM guide or sourcebook, then you might be following a different promotion path that you think's canonical than the one some would argue is the canon of 5th edition and not even know it. But even brushing those inconsistencies aside, to me the apex argument is one of choice. Whether you're a world builder and or a dungeon master, a writer, a storyteller, a player, or you just like the lore, being able to learn about, enjoy, and populate your worlds and campaigns with a diverse mix of beings is only an enhancement. And when it comes to infernal fiends, 70 is just better than 16. When you argue with math, you lose. And this hierarchy will give you a single master reference of all the devils, one that you are most certainly free to disagree with, and revise to your heart and your campaign's content. This is the epitome of choice. We start our discussion on devil promotions with an infernal caveat. When it comes to the rankings or promotion of infernal souls, anything is possible, because even in the discipline strictures of the 9 hells, there are always exceptions to the lawful rule. And Grilee speaks at length of these exceptions through his ancient writings, making clear that while there are certainly protocols and advancement guidelines that show both a recommended, common, and even typical path of promotion, do any of us really believe that if Asmodeus wanted to promote a Lemure directly to a pit fiend that he couldn't? As unlikely as that would ever be, if Asmodeus can turn another archdevil into a slug, which, oh by the way, he has done, then he can do whatever he wants to the rank-and-file Barbazu. And for the most part, so can his archdevils, so long as they follow the rules. So with this understanding that exceptions certainly exist, there are still some basic governing principles to devil promotion that have been documented through the eyes of their mortal authors, aka the game versions, all designed to complement the ranked hierarchy that you should be aware of. The first is that fealty is required. No devil can promote or demote another that has not sworn fealty to it. This is actually a very important rule to maintain order, designed by Asmodeus to prevent one rival devil from demoting another devil's forces as part of the constant scheming and power plays among the infernal powers that are so interwoven in the politics of hell. Next we have rank limits. A devil can be promoted only as high as one level below the promoting devil. So for example, a pit fiend cannot promote another devil to that of a pit fiend. The exception would be for named devils of that type. For example, pit fiends such as the former ruler of Avernus and Archdevil Bel, or members of the Dark Eight. The third principle of promotion is understanding that promotion expunges chaos. This is a good dungeon master and world-building note to be mindful of as you run encounters with the various levels of Barbazu. That is to say that as a devil rises in the ranks, they are further purged of chaotic thoughts, tendencies, and behaviors, meaning that the highest-ranking devils become thoroughly lawful and rigid, while lower-ranked devils often still exhibit various levels of chaos. Keeping this in mind when encounter building can be very helpful, providing some canonical latitude for lower-ranked devils to act out of their lawful character, an especially important factor when devils interact with a party of adventurers. An imp might exhibit far more chaotic tendencies in their deceit and trickery to confuse a group, while a pit fiend can be expected to operate far more within a highly disciplined, even narrow regiment that rarely, if ever, will run counter to their lawful alignment. The fourth principle is one that is both circumstantial and open to a bit of interpretation. For one to rise, another must fall. This is part of the 2nd edition lore found in the Faces of Evil supplement, where it intimates a devil may not rise in rank until another falls, i.e. a spot must open up in order to be promoted. The design intent here is to maintain an exact number of devils across certain ranks and roles, and I agree that this should apply to certain distinct or specialized groups within the infernal ranks that are listed in the lore as set and finite. Certain companies or legions in the Blood War, the Dark Eight, or Asmodeus's Malsheen Guard, for example. Regardless, I present it here as part of the established lore for your consideration. Next we have another principle, number 5, that in my opinion is again open to or subject to interpretation, at least in terms of scale, and it's called the promotion trinity. Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes provides us 3 primary forms of advancement. They are the collection of souls, some form of acknowledged glory or achievement, and of course treachery. And I only bring this up as it serves as a great example of why taking the written text as the spirit of your established canon and not the literal verbatim rule is so very important to successful encounters and world building. For this rule specifically, it uses the word primary, so especially at the least and lesser devil ranks, we can take some latitude understanding that promotions far more often occur to fill specific needs than by any achievement or treachery. I don't see many Lemures or Nupperibos acquiring enough souls, gaining any glory in battle, or performing sufficient treachery on another devil to warrant advancement. The Archdevils do, however, have a consistent need to replenish soldiers from the Blood War, or require an imp to fill some task on the mortal plane, desire a group of Spinagons to perform some covert actions, or need a Hamatula to guard something of importance. There are endless and far more mundane needs, and as such there are a myriad of reasons to just promote a devil for cause or purpose that fall well outside of that canonical trinity based upon the individual devil's own merit. So the recommendation here is follow the spirit of the law more than the letter of the law. This is a near-perfect example of doing just that, and is something to keep in mind as I present my full hierarchy. So now that we have discussed the principles of promotion, exactly how are the devils promoted, as in what mechanics are actually involved? The short answer is, however the promoting devil and the world builder or DM decide. The longer and more historically complex lore-based answer is one that is shrouded, you guessed it, in conflict, retcon, and a most distressing, to me at least, slow descent into a more PG-friendly presentation. There exist a myriad of both older, gruesome, and newer watered-down promotion and demotion mechanics that have been detailed across all versions, and they are as true or as non-existent as the world builder wants them to be. From a litany of various rites and rituals that range from fascinating to truly gruesome, including the problematic fiendish internal organ known as the ovatorium. The options are plentiful and variable to suit whatever appetite your table prefers. According to my chosen lore, most of these processes are overseen by the Ministry of Promotion, specifically run by Zabos, a pit fiend of the Dark Gate. The ministry is charged with recording and approving each promotion, where according to this 2nd and 3rd edition lore, they exact stringent requirements, where bad promotions are often punished by being placed on the front lines of the Blood War. Alternatively, some world builders just hand-wave the process, much like 5th edition does, and that's okay too. And then to reinforce the generic, well, we have the 5th edition's stated process of promotion, which is, and I need to quote this verbatim, I want to make sure that I get it exactly right, he says with just a hint of snark. In 5th edition, promotion, quote, invokes a brief, painful transformation, end quote. Is that it, 5e? Well, no, it's not. It actually gets worse, or better, depending upon your view, because Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes comes along and doubles down on its sanitized, PC move towards a G-rated family-friendly promotion, stating on page 13 that those in line for promotion go through a special ritual of flames that brings with it, and I'm quoting again, quote, ecstatic joy that transforms it into a mightier being, end quote. What is this, Dungeons and Dragons for Disney? No more torture or pain or even mild discomfort. I mean, not even a headache or a runny nose. No, promotion is fun, like being promoted at work and going out for a beer to celebrate, I guess. Well, now we know why some very cool Forgotten Fiends have not been brought into 5e, and likely will never see the light of day in a new update unless radically toned down to the point of being likely unrecognizable. Now, I'm not insensitive to the social changes of present day, and I can understand that resources like the Book of Vile Darkness are not for everyone. Times have definitely changed. But we're also living in a world where Wizards has officially stated that, quote, the Dark Sun setting is problematic for us in a lot of ways, end quote. As a Dark Sun fan, I don't know, maybe there's a middle ground we can find, as opposed to just throwing it away or tossing it on a shelf. But whichever side of this moving line of acceptance that you land on, it's fine, because unlike most other forms of media, such as movies, television, certainly video games, where the consumer has little to no control, in the realm of tabletop gaming, we the consumers are not beholden to that which we find overreaching, or any other money or shareholder-driven changes that we don't like. Wizbro cannot come take my books, prevent me from creating my own worlds, or play in whatever campaign setting with whatever rules I choose. And trust me when I tell you that Hasbro and WotC, they're well aware of this fact and are most definitely working to change it. They would far prefer to never print a book again and go full digital. And that is why you will find their own branded form of the vileness that is the Diablo-style whale hunting loot boxes coming to a virtual tabletop near you soon. So hold on to your books. With them, you have leverage. Never forget that. Now let us profile the devils you know, and maybe a few you do not, as we begin our long climb up the infernal corporate ladder. A few quick notes as we start. Please remember we are coalescing devils across as many as 6 versions and a half-century of game publications, so some, in fact most of my descriptions, discussions on abilities, and of course the lore, may not fit with your current or 5th edition worldview. But to be clear, everything I share today was considered canonical at one point. I will do my best to point out any speculation or assumptions made where the canon is weak or conflicting, but nothing in here is homebrew or custom. I will save that for the individual spotlight videos for each of these fiends. And I need to reiterate that if you're coming into this volume cold, you are missing out on a separate group of Outlander fiends covered in Volume 6 and the 6.5 update that are also important to get the complete and full ecology of these 9 hells. Now, for the vast majority of these 32 rank-and-file devils, plus the many variants that I've included, each have ample lore, history, and mechanics, not to mention some great homebrew opportunities that make them deserving of their own dedicated videos. But this can't be a 32-hour volume, so some of the lore, lots of the mechanics, and all of the homebrew will be reserved for future volumes of Discovery. And there is zero doubt that disagreement will be found with some or maybe all of these rankings. Heck, I even threw in a few curveballs early and on purpose, but nothing is written in stone here, and I always welcome spirited and friendly discourse on the matter. Curveballs, disagreements, what a great segue. As I was putting this list together from the Scribe of the Damned's text, I thought, what better way to start this master ranking than by coming out of the fiery gates with some early disruption and a bit of controversy. As we begin from the very bottom of the infernal hierarchy, you'd be forgiven for assuming that means we start with a Lemure. And I fully realize this goes against a well-established order, but hear me out, all is not as it seems. The Kalabon presents a unique challenge to what is intended to be a traditional infernal hierarchy. This placement in no way changes that Lemures represent the starting point for the vast majority of damned souls, or its position as the bottom rung for most demoted devils. However, the nature of the Kalabon necessitates a restricted and provisional position. That, or it's just another Outlander devil, which is an arguable position, but I'd like to make the case they belong in the hierarchy as a special circumstance, and one not without canonical precedent. Planescape veterans, or those that watched my video dedicated to the Nupperibo, may recall the canonical manner in which this also least devil used to exist. Just take a look at this 2E hierarchy. You can clearly see the Nupperibos placed as the bottom form fiend, yet we know the Lemure was still the starting point for the vast majority of new souls coming into this infernal afterlife, and the Nupperibo was used only as a punished state of demotion. This is, generally speaking, what I'm doing with the Kalabon, only with even more restrictions, which I'll share in a moment. In the Kalabon, there exists a devil type that is arguably more, or at least as pathetic in both station and power as the formless and all too common Lemure. Not only does every aspect of the Kalabon rival the worst aspects of these barely devils, they are also quite possibly even more repulsive, disgusting than the Lemure, itself not an easy task, and there is no doubt they are certainly a more rare sight. If anything, perhaps these two least devils share the spot, 31A and 31B. Now, you might be asking why not just put these in the Outlander category and be done with it. Well, maybe I'm just a sucker for a good origin story, maybe I felt sorry for the Lemures. Heck, maybe I just wanted to stir the pot. But let me share the primary reason I have them in the hierarchy along with those restrictions I mentioned a moment ago. First, the Kalabon is not only a demoted-only state of punishment as the Nupperibo was in past versions, but once you're a Kalabon, it's a form from which you will most likely never rise. Now, I always feel like I must caveat here that the Archdevils have the power to do whatever they want in the Hells, but from a purely standard operations perspective within the Nine Hells, once a Kalabon, always a Kalabon. Remember that while since forgotten, this fiend was an official devil introduced in the 3rd edition, and the Kalabon, in my opinion, has some very interesting lore and backstory that could really make for some fun world building and encounter narratives. But still, that alone would not have been enough for their inclusion here. No, I've included the Kalabon in Grilee's history as a least devil that perfectly aligns with the defiant nature of one of the most rebellious of archdevils. Exclusive and restricted to the 6th layer of hell, the archdevil Glazia, ruler of Malebranche and daughter of Asmodeus, prefers the Kalabon as her personal least devil, her very own insubordinate form of a Lemure, as well as her preferred and personally identifiable demotion or punishment state for those devils that have failed her in any way. Not only does this play right into her well-documented characteristics, unruly, rebellious, and overtly cruel, but as you will see as we climb higher up in this hierarchy, Glazia prefers to surround herself with subordinate fiends that are both unique to her and also, shall we say, visually challenged. Shocking to one's senses, a contrast intended only to amplify her own vanity. Additionally, Glazia experiences continual delight in using Kalabon devils as a continuing insult to the hag countess she deposed and obliterated, at least indirectly, when she took over as the ruler of the 6th layer. Now, if that doesn't track due to a lack of familiarity that you might have with the lore, let me quickly paint the profile picture of this rare and abhorrent least devil type for you. The Kalabon appear visually to be nothing more than a festering, shambling heap of moist, putrid green or brown flesh and mucus, mostly amorphous. Blood, viscera, and other fluids continually leak and drip from its misshapen, only vaguely humanoid form, giving its body a slippery and altogether revolting appearance. I have to tell you, every time I lay eyes on one of these, I am both repulsed, but also chuckle a little because they remind me so much of those anthropomorphic boogers from the old Mucinex commercials. Nevertheless, these insignificant devils not only rival Lemures as the most wretched form in all the 9 hells, but they also hold an important lore perspective that I believe warrant their inclusion in the hierarchy and their restriction to Malebranche. You see, the Kalabon devil originated as a direct spawn from the rotting flesh and fluids of the carcass of Malebranche's former ruler, the Hag Countess, with the confusing name of Malagard. After Malagard's death, her remains retained fragments of her wicked memories, a vile byproduct of her forever destruction. Trapped in a state of maddening pain and agonized torment, those original and progenitor Kalabon tore themselves free from the powerful hag's carcass to go forth and multiply into colonies that now number in the thousands. If you've not heard the story or seen my video on Malagard's truly horrific demise, not for the squeamish, check out my 5 Things About the Nine Hells video, link in the show notes. In the end, I included this as a least devil because as a world builder, I'd like to have a few more least devil options, but I do so with both caveats and restrictions. And you should feel free to adjust these and every other aspect of today's hierarchy to best fit the goals of your world and campaign. Now, as promised, for nearly every devil type that I profile today, I've scoured the most obscure tomes to find a piece of related lore you may not have known. And for the Kalabon, we get to explore their reproduction cycle. How fun. When a Kalabon consumes enough food, its form becomes swollen and distended. It then pops like a greasy meat bubble, splitting into 2 Kalabons, accompanied by a hideous, retching sound. This process is similar to cellular division, only much more disgusting, and is referred to as budding. As a bonus, it should also be noted that the Kalabon will rarely ever be found alone. They travel and hunt in groups called colonies, containing up to several dozen of the fiends, and for you players and DMs out there, if a Kalabon nears defeat in combat, it instantly splits into 2, with both then attempting to flee, one of its secrets of survival. Regardless of their rank and station, though Malagard is long dead, her essence lives on through these truly repulsive beings found wandering in their colonies on the fetid landscape of the 6th layer as a unique warning to and hallmark of any devil that dares fail the daughter of Asmodeus. Okay, now we can talk about the most pathetic of the least devils, 31st in our rankings, but, well, yeah, probably 31st in our hearts too. The Lemure represents the welcome to hell first devil form that the vast majority of new evil souls will embody, but not before they undergo a horrifying transformation to get there, losing all individuality, memories, and semblance of their former selves in the process. Despite its pathetic status, the Lemure is both easily the most abundant devil type in the 9 hells, counted by the millions, but also far more important than its pitiful nature might suggest. The Lemure is the resulting and revolting final form of the intake process of new souls, a process which squeezes out every drop of soul energy, kind of like an orange, yielding the 9 hells the soul energy it needs to operate. The more diabolic you were as a mortal, the more energy your soul shell now yields. Once this process is complete, the quivering, now energy-drained soul shell undergoes an infernal ritual and is then most often thrown into one of many pits across the 9 hells. The most infamous is located on Avernus and called the Maggot Pit, where the shell expires and is then reborn into a Lemure. And in that form it will stay for years, centuries, maybe millennia, until a new real devil is required. Until then, the Lemures will remain a grotesque, amorphous blob of flesh, not unlike the Kalabon, with only a vaguely humanoid shape, featuring 2 dull, soulless eyes and a gaping mouth. Their appearance is as deplorable as their status, with their bodies constantly quivering in agony. Lemures are, in mortal terms, mindless servants, mostly incapable of independent thought, yet they intrinsically know only 3 things: constant agony, to follow orders, and that they want to rise from this form to literally anything else. So, despite their lowly, feeble status, Lemures are an essential part of Hell's ecosystem, and a Lemure's only real purpose is to be the base building block upon which a real devil can be created. And it is their importance to the soul economy of Hell and their sheer abundance that, at least in the eyes of myself and the Scribe of the Damned, place them just above the also pathetic Kalabon. Now for some obscure lore on the Lemure. While the vast majority of Lemures come to be as part of the gruesome intake process I just detailed, there are also those that come to the Lemure form through punishment and demotion. And the lore tells us that these demoted Lemures bear a unique identifying mark that clearly signifies their failed status, separating them from the sea of new mortal souls that have been reborn as Lemures. These marked Lemures are even further hated by other devils, and even less respected Lemure, if there can be such a thing. The worst part of this mark of failure is the fact that the demoted Lemures are even less likely to ever rise from that least form. So unless the demoting devil has a change of heart, this is a forever form with no hope of promotion. Not sure about you, but for me, this is the ultimate nightmare-fueled afterlife. Continuing our look at these wretched devils of least value in the hierarchy of hell, at number 30 we have the newcomer, canonically speaking anyway, to the infernal hierarchy, the Nupperibo. This bloated devil monstrosity waddles about, blind, deaf, and mute, although the Nupperibo still manages to mumble shrieks of its own torment and agony as it senses your presence. Like all devils in this hierarchy, I plan to do a dedicated volume on each of them at some point. It just so happens that the Nupperibo already has its own Monster Lab video. If you want the full breakdown on the physical traits, player and DM advice, and some custom homebrew world building on the Nupperibo, you can check out that at the link below. For this series, we will briefly focus on the hierarchical role of the Nupperibo. And for such a pathetic least devil, the Nupperibo has seen a few noteworthy and significant changes throughout its life across the many versions of Dungeons & Dragons. As mentioned, the Nupperibo is a new canonical addition to the hierarchy of the Hells. In the 3rd edition, the Nupperibos had the distinction of not falling into the typical promotion system at all. In fact, according to the consensus 3rd edition lore, these mindless horrors were nothing more than the resulting demotion state of a devil that had failed its master. Think Gulthier, but far more pathetic, and weak, and blind, and obese. The textbook of insignificance. And if we were creating this new master hierarchy just a few years ago, the Nupperibo would definitely have been categorized as the single most outsider of Outlander devils. In fact, it's here that I'll share some of the obscure lore on the Nupperibo. If we step back into the 2nd edition lore, as stated in both the Planescape Faces of Evil and Tales of the Infinite Staircase resources, we find references indicating that Nupperibos are actually not fiends at all, or at least weren't at that time. They were actually ancient Beatorians, an evil afterlife form spawned from the descendant souls of the former inhabitants of the paradise land that was Beator before it transformed into the 9 Hells. This is part of the Serpents of Law origin story from the 2nd edition, and I've covered that along with the other origin stories of Hell. You can find those in the 9 Hells of Volume 2 video, link below. But as we study the scholarly texts of 5th edition lore, we learn that Nupperibos are now, in fact, for the first time ever, a common upgrade promotion from a Lemure, creating another in the least class of the infernal hierarchy. And while this is a 100% no-doubt retcon of the established lore, I'm good with it. I look at this as more of a corrective action, creating some distance from that 2nd edition origin story, a necessary change, unlike some others, looking at you, Abishai. And for my own self-serving reasons, if you're going to take a non-devil and canonically put them in the 5e hierarchy, then my position on including the Kalabon is only bolstered. Although I'm guessing most Lemures are not taking this news well, as I'm not sure how much of an upgrade this bloated and blind, hellish doughboy is, and I'm certain that all Lemures would prefer their former promotion rank of Spinagon. But technically speaking, the Nupperibo is at the top of the least devil food chain, and yikes, that's not saying much. So as we move on to the lesser devils, I have to ask, which of these 3 least devils would you prefer your newly evil soul occupy? Comment down below. Decisions. Moving on from the absolute bottom of the infernal food chain, we break into the lesser devils with the 29th ranked Imp. Now regarded as a first promotion lesser devil, at least in 5th edition, the challenge rating 1 Imp has, here's that word again, a conflicted past through the many versions. While imps have been present since the 1st edition, they've existed for decades as non-Barbazu familiars for evil casters of the dark and arcane arts, and mostly existed outside of any hierarchy of hell. As insignificant as you may think the imp is, I doubt many of you would not agree this is far and away a preferred form of any of the 3 we just covered. I've not been shy in voicing my disagreements with some of the recent lore changes, the Abishai certainly topping that list, but this change definitely makes sense to me. And my only question is why it took so long, as spine devils and imps share so many similarities. One might even posit that a spine devil is arguably the upgraded, slightly larger, better flying variant cousin of an imp. And speaking of variants, for our impish hidden secrets, I'll present not one, not two, but 6 obscure to forgotten imp variants you likely have not heard before. We will start with the most obscure and certainly rarest, dating back to Dragon Magazine number 42. That was 44 years ago, friends. There we find the mostly forgotten Asperum imp, listed as a squat green imp with a distinct look of an infernal fusion of a dwarf and a frog. They have a bizarre sense of humor and delight in malicious pranks, in what would become a common trait among imps moving forward. Stated as numbering only 13 in all of existence, the Asperum is a rare sight indeed, and I only mention them here as a matter of completeness. I mean, with only 13 originally, who knows if any still exist, but at least they got a mention, and that's about as obscure as lore can get. Now let's take a look at some creative 3rd edition variants, starting with the Euphoric Imp. Standing 2 feet tall, but barely weighing 10 pounds, these emaciated and strung-out imps possess all the hallmarks indicative of their specialization: uneven and staggered walk, bloodshot eyes. Yeah, these guys are baked, and definitely did not take Michelle Pfeiffer's or Ice Cube's advice to never get high off your own supply. You see, the Euphoric Imp has the ability to secrete hallucinogenic slime that they administer through their tiny and feeble stingers. These guys could definitely spice up a PG-13 or even R-rated adventure, and also perhaps make the wheels come off your campaign utterly and completely, so proceed with caution. Next, we have the Bloodbag Imps. Never say the devils in power are not without creativity, or that the 3rd edition designers didn't push boundaries. Pretty safe bet you're not getting an official 5e version of this guy, or the previous one for that matter. Bloodbag Imps were created as a workaround to the fact that most inhabitants of the Nine Hells cannot cast healing spells. Thus we have a horrid, bloated creature composed of little more than delicately taut skin, holding in several gallons of blood, and thus serving as an informal version of a Red Cross field medic, and most often serving appropriately in the Blood War, where, if you'll excuse my Full Metal Jacket reference, you'll find them in the rear with the gear. Another imp variant is the Assassin Imp. You may recall these guys, as I do, from encounters in Ravenloft's Barovia setting. These vicious little creatures are cruel even by imp standards, and take great pleasure killing helpless innocents. They have mostly black and dark gray scales, and often wield small razor blades. Their most unique trait is a tail stinger that can inject a sleep toxin, which the little cowards utilize first to ensure their victims can't fight back, while they perform some murderous throat slitting. Even more powerful versions of these devils exist, called Murder Lords, but note that according to the lore, assassin imps are confined to and only exist in the demiplane of dread, which means until and unless that lore is updated, these variants are probably best placed as outlanders. And last but not, definitely least as well, are the Filth Imps, known better by the derogatory nickname given them by any devil who has been near one, Stinkers. These yellowish-brown, pot-bellied, and odious-smelling creatures may hail from the Nine Hells, but you will rarely find them there, being hated by most other Barbazu, even other imps, resulting in them mostly being found in service of the foulest of criminals and underground figures on the material plane. I actually used one of these many years ago in a mid-level campaign where it was the familiar and an annoying but fun RP element serving as a thieves guild leader in the dredges of Skullport. Good times. Despite their wretched state, they are not without any redeeming qualities, as they are known to have an uncanny ability to create exceptional forged documents. Perhaps another something for you world builders to keep in mind the next time you have a party wanting to traverse into the Nine Hells. There are many more imp variants, such as the blood-sucking Akathasa imps found in Tardis, the book imps who often hold lost secrets, and the gold-skinned gilded imps with a petrifying stinger. However, we must move on. Variants aside, and regardless of their station, the customary and traditional imps have always performed the same role in the Nine Hells, as spies and messengers for their masters, and tricksters looking to mislead mortals. Certainly not a glamour station in the infernal afterlife, but still a no-brainer upgrade over those least devils we've covered thus far. First appearing on page 49 of the Monster Manual 2, published in 1983 for the second edition, the Spinagon or Spine Devil rests near the bottom of the Lesser Devil rung at number 28, but likely welcoming the imp to this tier so that these diminutive fiends that barely stand 2 feet tall and rarely weigh more than an overfed poodle are no longer on the bottom or risk a demotion into the least status. Spine Devils take on an appearance like that of a gargoyle, or even a slightly larger, more dangerous, spiky imp. But that is where the similarities generally end. Spine Devils bristle with sharp, spiked barbs all over its body, hence their name, and depending upon what version your Spinagon originated, their spines are either venomous or turn into fiery projectiles. They also possess sharp talons and can, of course, take flight. Spinagons are ultra-cruel fiends that delight in torture as they look to give much of what they have likely endured as least devils. While certainly not as mindless as say Lemures, they are nonetheless generally regarded as a bit dim-witted and can be easily tricked. One reason I have found for these small, shrieking fiends to be in a constant foul mood is the hit they've taken to their challenge rating in recent versions, falling from a CR4 in 3E to today where they sit as a lowly CR2 fiend. Regardless, turning their small size into an advantage, Spine Devils often serve as spies for their devil masters, which is generally the only time they will travel solo, preferring to move about in small flocks of 2 to 5 in order to gain the benefits and strength of numbers. Spine Devils can be seen in the skies of the warmer layers of the Nine Hells, while generally avoiding the frigid layers of Stygia, Cania, or Cania if you prefer, and Nessus unless commanded otherwise. While not in flight or service, they will often perch themselves among the rocks on those temperate layers as they creep among the shadows and hunt in their flocks, always looking to cause pain and suffering on lesser creatures. On the material plane, they are far less common than, say, the imp, but can occasionally be found in the service of powerful warlocks and evil spellcasters, usually on loan from a greater devil and probably part of a Faustian pact. On to the obscure, one particularly interesting trait among the Spine Devils really speaks to the extreme cruelty they often exhibit, even by fiendish standards. They have a sadistic tendency to make their prey beg for mercy, at which time they find great pleasure in their attempts to mimic the victim's cries and pleas, and doing so with their garbled infernal accent. Continuing our slow climb up this infernal ladder, at our rank 27 we find the violence-loving bearded devil, also known as the Barbazu, one of the more common of the lesser fiends. Like the Spine Devil, the Barbazu also first appeared in the 1983 Monster Manual 2. Standing approximately 6 feet tall and weighing close to 250 pounds, the Barbazu is the first humanoid fiend in our hierarchy, with a lean muscular build, slightly reptilian traits, and of course its namesake, a thick beard that is as long as it is vile, often infested and composed of venomous snakes or otherwise poisonous. While their skin is most often one of many shades of sickly green, often tattooed, there exist many Barbazu with crimson skin as well, just as depicted in some of the official art. The bearded devil's weapon of choice is almost always a wicked saw-toothed glaive, halberd, spear, or some form of polearm. They are so fond of this particular weapon type that it's quite rare to see a bearded devil fighting with anything else, including their most deadly claws. Unlike the fiends profiled thus far, the Barbazu is both violent and volatile, seeking any opportunity to cause bloodshed. Born not of infernal orders, but an innate bloodlust and true desire for carnage and brutality. A gruesome fact evidenced countless times on the battlefield where the Barbazu has been seen continuing to maim enemy corpses long after death. With their below-average intelligence, they're not exactly the critical thinkers and philosophers of the Nine Hells, but then again, they don't need to be, and they are certainly smart enough to follow their marching orders as they throw themselves upon the endless waves of the Tanar'ri as one of the most common frontline devil soldiers of the Blood War. This is both their primary role in Beator and one they willingly accept. While the Barbazu may seem a bit on the common or ordinary side, that's by design, as bearded devils are actually the quintessential form you'd want when designing a base Shocktrooper. They are relentless, brutal warriors purpose-bred for the chaos and carnage of the Blood War. Their savage cries a reminder just how much they enjoy the bloodshed. For all these reasons, aside from the countless fodder of Lemures, the Barbazu Devil is usually the first and most numerous of the Shocktroop-type devils one might find on or near a battlefield, and as such it's hard to traverse Avernus and not run into one or 50. While not terribly powerful solo, they can be devastating in numbers, especially when employing their barbarian-like frenzy, and never forget that their vile beards can also strike, carrying with it a deadly disease called devil chills that is known to sap the strength of their enemies. When not engaged in the many battles on Hell's behalf, Barbazu can be found in service to the many greater devils, such as the Omnizu, and there are legions of these shock troops awaiting orders, most generally on the first 4 layers of Hell, but particularly prevalent upon Minneros, serving its archdevil Mammon. And it's here that we find some obscure lore that you may not know about the Barbazu. If we look at their official Monster Manual 2 introduction, the lore suggests that the Barbazu are stated as originating from that 3rd layer of Hell, which actually makes perfect sense, a swampy, fetid marshland of a plane ruled by its greedy, amphibious-like archdevil. This lore fits in perfectly with their own reptilian roots. This lore has been toned down in later editions, but that Minneros heritage is definitely still present. As a dungeon master and world builder, I've always regarded the Bearded Devil as a good first encounter to introduce lower-level parties to the horrors of infernal fiends. They are abundant, savage, and just deadly enough to serve as a preview of the brutality to come, but still far weaker than most devils, which is why they sit so low in our hierarchy. It's an icy devil, but don't call it an ice devil lest you draw the wrath of a Gellugon near you. The Fimbrul devil, slotting in as our rank 26 fiend, occupies a somewhat ambiguous and overshadowed position in the Nine Hells, abroad, and certainly in this hierarchy, and one could arguably place them more accurately as an Outlander fiend. I have to admit that based on my own ranking criteria, or even my own fiendish preferences, there may still exist more deserving devils to occupy this spot, like the Remenon or the Withering Devils for example, both Outlanders that I have covered previously. This is only amplified if using historical significance and depth of lore as your barometer and exclusive factors of the hierarchical equation. Lucky for the Fimbrul Devil, need is also a component, and there's something to be said for flavor. Still, their inclusion here is admittedly a bias, an indulgence if you will, but also one that I believe other world builders may share, as this frosty fiend squarely caters to a niche requirement for more ice-based devils to populate the colder planes of the Nine Hells. As veteran infernal travelers are well aware, 3 of Hell's 9 layers are insanely cold, so maybe I am breaking my own rules here, but I already shattered any illusion of conformity with the Kalabon placement, so this shouldn't be much of a surprise, and you can always revise to your own world-building efforts. Nonetheless, Fimbrul Devils, emerging from the lore of the Neverwinter Nights campaign setting and adapted into the 4th edition, are one of the more obscure, little-known fiends, but they're not exactly little. Looking into the devil's etymology, the word Fimbrul originates from the Icelandic Old Norse word Fimbul without the R, which translates to mighty, giant, or even great. And as many lore veterans will likely recall, our own Forgotten Realms has a small nation in Laracond, known as the Land of Giants, also called Fimbrul, so all the lore pieces do fit. The Fimbrul Devil might not be a frost giant, but at 7 foot tall, they're looking down upon most of us player characters, and they of course exhibit a definitive icy visage, often presenting themselves as gaunt, slender, sometimes even decayed or skeletal humanoid fiends. Their skin carries a haunting ice blue hue that is at times accentuated by craggy, ice-like spikes that protrude menacingly from their forms. And if one were to squint just enough, you might even mistake one of these for some kind of lesser Ice Lich variant. Even you Game of Thrones fans out there might see these having some similarities to the Night King. Their icy appearance is the physical manifestation of the frozen wastelands of Stygia and Cania, or Canaya if you prefer, the 5th and 8th layers of the hells the Fimbrul most often calls home. Although occasionally, you may even find a group in Nessus. But let's be real, you're not going to Nessus anytime soon. Adapted to the frozen environments of these native frigid layers, Fimbrul devils exhibit a remarkable ease in navigating and surviving these harsh conditions, able to effortlessly move unimpeded across difficult ice and snow, making them efficient defenders, hunters, and warriors in those frozen realms by using their mastery over the cold terrain to their advantage. With both an icy breath weapon and an ability called Frozen Prison, the Fimbrul devil has multiple innate powers to slow or even immobilize their enemies. And although they have been known to use weapons, they generally are just as satisfied using their claws to tear through your flesh. Just by their icy visual alone, you would expect the Fimbrul devils to be resistant to cold, which they are. But they are also surprisingly and uniquely resistant to fire as well. This makes them a versatile and hardy combatant in the diverse climates of the 9 hells. For some obscure lore on the Fimbrul, it is said that the aftermath of an encounter with a Fimbrul devil will leave a lasting impression on any survivors. Those who have faced and lived to tell the tale of these devils often report feeling unshakable chills for years following their encounter, a haunting reminder of the near-death experience they've endured. And while this does not present any real mechanical advantage to the devil, this facet of the lore would be an excellent means by which to slowly introduce a Fimbrul devil into your world. In addition to the frozen hells, you will also find the Fimbrul devils present upon the material plane, where they are often found in service of one of many cults, such as the cult of Ashmedai. For me personally, I see these frigid fiends both playing the role of a minion to both Ozeloth and Gel'Ugan devils, as well as being tasked directly by the Archdevil Levistus, where they serve their master's will in the northern reaches of Faerun as he plots escape from his iceberg prison upon Hell's 5th layer. Often serving along bearded devils as another form of frontline shock troops of the infernal armies, we have the Merregon, also known as Legion devils, ranking at 25 in our hierarchy. Found on page 122 of the Fiendish Codex II for the 3rd edition, Merregon devils are comprised of the souls of fallen warriors, these soldiers now serving in vast, endless legions that possess no individuality but overwhelm their enemies by sheer force of numbers. Standing approximately 6 feet tall and weighing in at around 180 pounds, canonically every Merregon looks nearly identical, highlighted by a twisted metal mask molded directly onto its face. Merregons are the epitome of single-purpose devils, and they have no ability to speak, only communicating through one-to-one telepathy with their master. But they do possess unshakable loyalty and will follow all orders without question no matter the situation, and will only retreat when ordered to do so. For me personally, I really like the role they play, perhaps my favorite of the frontline soldiers. The visual of these marching to war in unison, obedient and unflinching. As a world builder, I actually prefer these over the Barbazu, although each certainly has their place, and the Merregon are decidedly one-dimensional. But as far as lesser devils go, I think the Legion devils are really underutilized. Likely for many reasons, but one of them has to be the official 5e artwork. Oh my, just look at this. When I think of a sea of infernal devil soldiers marching to battle in the Blood War, I want to think the Immortals from the movie 300 or the Unsullied from the Game of Thrones. And I know Merregon are not supposed to be elite like those examples, but they are a challenge rating 4 devil, so they don't have to look, goofy. Yeah, I was really pretty disappointed in the artwork for the Merregon in 5th edition. They look far too pathetic, more like some challenge rating 1 fodder. I think the way the art represents any being in Dungeons & Dragons goes a long way to influence the popularity and utilization of that creature. And I personally really think this art only hurts their use across many tables. They're on par statistically with the Bearded Devils, and while they are designed accurately to be an underwhelming single devil, in vast numbers, with zero fear, no free will, and thus no retreat and an unbreakable resolve, marching in the face of any odds, they can be and should be terrifying. That is the vision I have tried to represent in their art for this volume, which is, in my opinion, far more representative and appropriate. I do like the clear contrast between these Legion Devils and other lesser frontline devils like the Barbazu. While you could certainly make an argument that one-on-one the Merregon and Barbazu are near equals, to me the Legion Devil lore and their myopic purpose, plus their mindless obedience, gives them a world-building edge in some very specific scenarios. My looking back to the 3rd edition Merregon to find some interesting lore for you only amplified my disappointment with the 5th edition version. 3rd edition Legion Devils have an ability not present in the 5th edition that was both pretty cool mechanically and also very thematic for the role. It's called Legion's Strength, and it combines the physical vitality of all Merregon in a 100-foot radius into a single pool of health. This plays perfectly into their role as an unflinching army. Using this ability, any damage that a Legion Devil would take came out of this combined health pool. Now, once that health pool was depleted, all the Legion Devils in it die immediately. Just think of the fear-inspiring visual this could create, a facade of invincibility. Blood War accounts were reported far and wide by foes of many battles against the Legion Devil, all reporting that these Merregons seemed to absorb blow after blow, fighting on despite massive injuries, until finally a single decisive attack against one would cause the entire unit to fall to the ground, defeated and slain. How cool is that? I said this volume would have no time for homebrew, so pretend you didn't hear this, but I want to share one small tweak that I've made to the Merregon Devils in my past adventures at my table that I think most DMs might appreciate. The lore states that each Merregon Devil looks identical to one another, but I found a lot of plot success in a campaign I ran against the backdrop of the Blood War by having multiple companies of Legion Devils, each with their own unique mask. The result that each Merregon looks identical to any other Merregon in that company, but provides a way to uniquely identify the different companies, kind of like their own banner. This was very useful to me, but tell me what you think. I actually really like the potential flavor of the Merregon Devil and feel like this fiend got really shortchanged in 5th edition. But if you spice up that dreadful image a bit and maybe give them the 3rd edition Legion's Strength ability, the Merregon can be a blank canvas for your world-building armies of the Blood War, simply for the landscape or backdrop of battle they can represent in your world. When a pet fiend general decides that his Barbazu or Merregon company is not getting the job done, the logical upgrade would be to our number 24 fiend, the Bueroza or Steel Devil. Yet another forgotten devil introduced in the 3rd edition. We find the Steel Devil on page 137 of the Fiendish Codex 2. Steel Devils are far more of a rare devil soldier with a 3rd edition challenge rating of 6. Their primary role is to cut into the infinite waves of abyssal invaders in the Blood War. Thus, like the Barbazu and Merregon before them, they are most often found in, but not limited to, Avernus. Steel Devils are formed from the souls of fallen, evil soldiers and warriors. The lore only suggests that while the Merregon Devils are formed from the souls of fallen soldiers, Steel Devils may in fact be formed from more accomplished soldiers, generals, and other infamous but notable evil combatants. They are driven by war, they crave war, they seek war, and they march headlong into battle encased in a full suit of silver plate mail and wielding a massive oversized great sword. In terms of physical appearance, a typical Steel Devil stands at a sturdy 6 feet plus and weighs well north of 250 pounds, which includes its heavy plate armor. And that armor is the Steel Devil's protection and its tomb. Not an inch of its plate has a crevice or opening, no flesh exposed, sealed to perfection. One unique trait among the Steel Devils is an agility and battlefield alacrity that really belies the look of their heavy, plodding armor. The Bueroza's motions flow with a fluid rhythm born of a highly skilled veteran of combat tactics. It's an unsettling mix of brute force and grace that is likely a mix of infernal magic and the soul's natural affinity for war. What the Steel Devil lacks in sheer hulking raw power of some of the larger devils, such as the Malebranche War Devil or Orthons, both of whom they have a strong distaste for, they make up with an uncanny combat intelligence, exceptional battlefield tactics, and a knack for manipulating the battlefield to their advantage. As a DM, if you ever use the Steel Devil, one thing they will never do is make simple tactical mistakes. And it is that level of battlefield intelligence, combat awareness, and tactics that create a clear distinction from the Legion or Bearded Devils, and also why they are significantly more rare. Eager for violence at every turn, having dedicated their existence to defending the infernal territories of the Nine Hells, Steel Devils are the textbook definition of calm under pressure, a savvy veteran of warfare with impeccable battlefield discipline, basically the exact opposite of the savage and emotionally charged Barbazu. As formidable of a frontline soldier as the Steel Devil is, many of their Archdevil masters actually find their talents wasted upon the Blood War. And when not dispatched to or engaged in the many battles and wars on Hell's behalf, they are often used to guard various citadels, fortresses, and gateways across any of the Nine Hells or beyond, where they maintain a state of perpetual alertness, ready to enact extreme violence under a calm visage without any hesitation. I mentioned earlier that their sealed plate armor is also their tomb. Our Steel Devil obscure lore explains that the armor and sword in use by the Fiend is actually manifested as part of their creation, meaning both the armor and weapon are actually part of the devil. And should the Steel Devil be slain, it will transmute into a pile of discarded rubble, and their once pristine steel armor and oversized sword will now be reduced to contorted and worthless lead. As much as I like the Steel and the Merregon Devils for their flavor and fit in the infernal armies, the Barbed or Hamatula Devil, slotting in at number 23 in our hierarchy, is what many consider the primary and most common of the proper lesser devils a party of heroes might encounter early in their trips beyond the gates of perdition. Just as their name implies, they take on the appearance of tall humanoids covered in sharp barbs, spines, and hooks. And the best piece of advice I can give you is also the most obvious. Never attempt to grapple a barbed devil, unless you enjoy hugging an angry porcupine, or otherwise have a good plan to avoid the Fiend impaling you on those many long spiked barbs covering its body. Those that have only played during the 5th edition might be surprised to learn that the Barbed Devil must have really earned the scorn of their Wizards of the Coast masters, as the Hamatula received one of, if not the, single largest power drain and canonical demotion with the release of the 5th edition, going from a challenge rating of 11 to their current CR of 5, a pretty steep drop-off. And while you should know by now that I'm not adverse to calling out the ill-advised or illogical changes, this in my opinion was a change for the better. However, even with their nerf, standing 7 feet tall and weighing in at over 300 pounds, with claws so deadly the Hamatula prefers them over most weapons, and the Hamatula Devil is still a pretty significant jump up from the lesser devils we've covered thus far. Add their at-will greater teleport, the ability to hurl flames, and the sheer delight they gain from combat engagement, especially if a reward waits the victor, and despite their lower rank in this hierarchy, the Barbed Devil may get my label as the first devil you might want to really take caution with. As for their role in the Nine Hells, Hamatulas are renowned for their covetous and greedy nature, and they prefer the role of a guardian to more powerful devils, serving as bodyguards or protecting their vaults, portals, and fortresses. These always ready-to-fight fiends are also well known for an alertness that makes them difficult to surprise as they attend to their duties without boredom or distraction. I also have two interesting pieces of obscure lore to share, both going back to the 2nd edition. In the Planescape Monstrous Compendium for 2nd edition, we're told that Hamatula devils are one of the few Barbazu that cannot freely move about the various layers of hell. Presumably this was done as a measure to prevent the fiends straying away from their assigned tasks. In the same source, we also learn of what history calls the most concentrated and formidable Barb Devil army ever assembled. Formed by Gazra, a pit fiend governor who resides in a crystal tower that rests upon the Mount of Leaping Flames, also known as Abramoch, on the fiery lair of Phlegethos. There, the pit fiend commands over 5,000 elite trained Barb Devils who secure Hell's 4th lair, as well as hunting down deserters from the Blood War and weeding out any corruption from its officers. So far, we've covered 3 lesser devils that most often play the role of shock troops on the front lines of the Blood War. But when that phalanx of bearded or Merregon devils just isn't shock troopy enough for the job, we can turn to our 22nd ranked fiend to turn up the level of shock trooper to 11 by enlisting the 4E devils, actually called the Shock Troop Devil. Shock Troop Devils are heavily armored and imposing, inspiring a bit more shock and awe on the battlefield than their lesser counterparts. What the Legion or Barbazu devils lack in terms of a formidable presence, they usually make up for in sheer numbers. However, the hulking and winged Shock Troop Fiend, which is a bit more of a rare sight to be sure, are a clear military upgrade, both in terms of their physical combat abilities and in that they perform a function a lot like that of a mortal cavalry, as entire units of these fiends charge directly into enemy lines, wreaking havoc and breaking up tough formations. Shock Troop Devils are best used in mixed companies, as like any cavalry, they can end up losing momentum if they stay mired in the melee for too long. Because of this, they often employ a strike and retreat, rinse and repeat combat strategy. Though based in the 9 Hells, they deploy wherever their brutal skills are needed, waging war on behalf of the infernal interests across all the outer planes. When not in use on the front lines of the Blood War, you will often find Shock Troop Devils in service as brutal skirmish assault troops, location guards, and even occasionally as bodyguards. Like most frontline infernal fiends, the Shock Troop Devil is a bit on the dull intellectual side. I mean, what particularly bright fiend would choose to be on the front lines of the Blood War? This makes the Shock Troop an unusually blunt devil, favoring straightforward, unrelenting violence over any semblance or notion of subtlety. In combat, they first smash into enemies like metal rams, dazing and scattering their foes. While they're not much for strategy, they are highly skilled in combat, so they do remain reasonably tactical. As most are probably aware, anything 4E stat related can be a nightmare to convert, so keep that in mind if you ever choose to deploy these fairly unique fiends in your campaign. As a 4th edition devil, they were listed as a level 16, which roughly, and I do mean roughly, translates to a 5E balancing target around challenge rating 10 or 11. So definitely a tough foe, especially in numbers, and certainly an upgrade over the frontline devils we've covered so far. Because these fiends made their only appearance in the 4th edition of the game, as you can imagine, they are a little light on the lore side. That said, I do have an obscure ability to share that you likely have never heard of. It's called Asmodeus' Shield. It's a passive trait that gives the Shock Troop Fiend +2 to all defenses against divine powers while they're unbloodied, and a -2 penalty to the same while bloodied. For those that are not aware of this 4th edition conditioned, bloodied simply means they are below 50% health. While these charging fiends are quite capable of inflicting massive casualties solo, they are not without some significant vulnerabilities and are best incorporated into a larger company of Barbazu or Merregons, whatever frontline soldiers you deem. It should be noted also that the Shock Troop Fiend can actually fly faster than they can run, despite their heavy armor. Overall, for a rank 22 fiend, I think the Shock Troop Devil adds a bit of flavor to the generally more straight-at-you fare of Devil soldiers, potentially worth a conversion effort in the right campaign or scenario. Originating in the 1999 2nd edition sourcebook Guide to Hell, and further expanded upon in a few 3rd edition books, including one the likes the game will never see again, the Book of Vile Darkness, we find the last updates to this fiend falling just outside the top 20. The Kocrachon Devil, one of 3 fiends who fill a very specific niche role across the 9 hells. The diminutive Kocrachon stands only 5 feet tall, with a chitinous exoskeleton enameled in hues that range from sickly yellow-greens to dark purples and blues, but always glistening with an oily sheen and reverberating with those chilling, stridulent insect-like noises. Of its 6 spindly limbs, only the 2 largest are even strong enough to wield combat weapons if necessary, although it should be noted that their weaker forelimbs, while not giving any combat advantages, are very dexterous, giving the Kocrachon a decided advantage in terms of any tasks that require surgical-type precision. Pound for pound, the Kocrachon is certainly outmatched by many lesser devils in a direct confrontation, combat they will only engage in as an absolute last resort, fleeing if at all possible. Despite their lack of desire to engage in combat, this is a fiend you really do not want to be anywhere near. This insect-like fiend is intelligent, and it's designed for just 2 purposes: to inflict pain and suffering, and extract information, something they both delight and excel in. Kocrachons primarily serve as interrogators in Beator, specializing in extracting information and meting out prolonged and agonizing punishment to all manner of beings and damned souls. From celestials, demons, definitely mortals, and even devils who fall out of the favor of their master, the Kocrachon is an equal opportunity master of pain. Although interestingly, upon creation, a Kocrachon isn't immediately aware of its intended purpose, nor does it come into existence with these skills. Whether it's promoted or demoted into Kocrachon status, this tortuous Barbazu must first study at the School of Pain, which is hidden underneath the Knoll of Blades in Dis, the 2nd layer of the 9 hells. Here the Kocrachons study at great length, perhaps even centuries, becoming the absolute supreme masters of the physiology of known mortal and immortal creatures, as well as the psychology of their minds. With this knowledge and their above-average intelligence, Kocrachons leverage this narrow but unrivaled proficiency to inflict an unprecedented combination of physical pain, mental anguish, and psychological influence on beings all across the multiverse. With a lack of the warrior mentality or even any semblance of bravery, you might think the Kocrachon are looked down upon as cowards, but in fact the opposite is true. Many devils fear their presence, and the Kocrachon still commands a significant level of authority and respect from the archdevils it often serves. Respect that is derived from their mastery of pain and their detached clinical and cruel demeanor, making them such effective instruments of suffering. Falling into the clutches of a Kocrachon might well be the worst of all fates that could befall you in the 9 hells. So expert are they at the art of torture that they very rarely kill their victims in the process of their work, despite the most extreme of practices, thus ensuring repeat and enduring future sessions can be scheduled until they have everything they seek from their victims, and more. While often found in Dis as a favored fiend of Dispater, Kocrachons can still be found across most of the planes, really wherever demotion, torture, or information extraction is required, but rarely found in the presence of its hated rivals, the Kytons and Excruciarchs, fellow fiendish interrogators whom the Kocrachon regard as clumsily brutal and vastly inferior in the skills and art of suffering, despite their higher rank, which is always a source of annoyance to the Kocrachon. However, there is a silver lining for the Kocrachon that lies in its unique promotion path, and this is something they are innately aware of from the moment of their inception. Should any Kocrachon serve with the distinction of 223 years of faithful service, then they will be rewarded with a promotion and increase in station, one that is both rare and unique as one of the few devil types that most often bypasses any structured hierarchy, able to ascend directly to that of a beautiful Iranese devil. This distinguished and time-held ritual of advancement is well known to every Kocrachon, and is the single driving motivation making them so universally exceptional at their role. Slotting in at rank 21 in our hierarchy, some might feel the Kocrachon is ranked higher than its physical capabilities warrant. And if these rankings were simply based on 1v1 combat abilities, you'd be right. I think of all the lesser devils below it, my money would easily side with all but maybe the Spinagon and the Imp. But the Kocrachon really embody one of the principles I wanted to highlight and exhibit in creating this hierarchy, the selective use of characteristics outside of just sheer power in determining rank. In this case, the Kocrachon's intelligence, its well-defined role, a fascinating backstory, and its proficiency and acumen that make it better than almost any other devil at a specific job, task, or skill. To those that have experience and or knowledge of the veiled skills of the Kocrachon and the crucial role they play in maintaining order and extracting value from the souls under their charge, perhaps this Master of Interrogation is in fact ranked too low. Closing out with some obscure lore you may not have known, I too thought I knew all there was to know about the Kocrachon, but my research uncovered some pretty fascinating and dark lore surrounding these little guys. There exist legendary infernal texts that illustrate, through story, the Kocrachon's vast knowledge of physical anatomy and the skill of their scalpels. One of these tales in particular outlines a special ritual exclusive to rare and select red Abishai that have reached acclaim and acknowledgement by Tiamat. These red children of Tiamat are also awarded a direct promotion to the highly desired rank and form of an Erinese. In this ritualistic promotion process, the lucky red Abishai must visit the Knoll of Blades in Dis, where the most skilled Kocrachons reside. Here, the Abishai submits to the care of a team of the highly skilled surgical fiends and must endure a most excruciating procedure, where using only the art of the blade and some infernal magic, the Kocrachons cleave the Abishai's external form and rearrange its facial features into the winged female Erinese. I have been told that beauty is pain, but this is another level. Behold the terrifying mask veiling its face, where only baleful red eyes peer fixed upon you. Bald, pale-skinned, and ruthless, it wields a weapon of torment adorned with various tools of the trade. Often found clad in blood-stained leather armor, complete with a butcher-like apron, we have the Excruciarch breaking into the top 20. First introduced in 2009 on page 132 of the Fiendish Codex II, these fiends of torment are equipped with instruments of torture that hang from their belts, including whips, chains, hooks, each designed to inflict maximum pain. Excruciarchs are probably best known by their mortal title, Pain Devil, which is a very blunt descriptor of their primary function, as well as the perverse joy they derive from the task. Of course, as their name implies, the primary role of these fiendish torturers is to inflict maximum pain upon the unfortunate, either as a punishment, demotion, or in some cases to extract information. However, unlike the Kocrachon, who are primarily used to extract information, Pain Devils are most often employed to met out misery and woe for the failures of other fiends who face demotion to a fallen, punished state by their hand and their master's order. And it is because of their primary roles in the Nine Hells that they, along with the Kyton and the Kocrachon, are so despised by the many other fiends in Beator, despised and feared. For if an infernal fiend finds themselves in the company of one of these torture devils, they likely know it is at the behest of a greater or archdevil. While Pain Devils can be found about anywhere their service is required, they are most often found in the chilling tunnels of Khania or Kanaya, serving Mephistopheles as the archdevil's preferred fiend of suffering. Additionally, Pain Devils are also a common sight on the fiery landscapes of Phlegethos. There, Belial and Fierna often employ them for various tasks of punishment resulting from the diabolic court. One place you most likely will not see an Excruciarch is on the plain of Mineros, specifically in the city of Jangling Hitter, where the chain-loving Kytons, who we're going to be profiling next, are most common. For our deep lore on the Pain Devil, as you know, they're always found wearing a mask over their face. But what you may not know is that, generally speaking, no two Excruciarchs will be found with the same mask. This is by design, as it is one aspect of their visual appearance they prefer to personalize, used to develop renown and infamy, and easily distinguish themselves from others of their kind. I would also add here that the Pain Devil is far more of a mercenary type fiend, than either the Kocrachon or the Kyton. As such, they are more likely to be persuaded, aka bribed, into sharing some intimate knowledge they might have acquired. The rattling of chains announces the arrival of the last of our 3 fiends who specialize in torment, the Kyton, also known as the Chain Devil, and it comes in at rank 19, a fiend also renowned for its mastery of torture and interrogation. First introduced in the Plains of Law resource, the Kyton is a humanoid devil colored in various crimson shades. Closer inspection of a Kyton's form will reveal the skin's countless scars and marks of pain they have both inflicted upon themselves and endured from others. However, the most obvious visual trait are the chains that wrap the devil like a noisy metal shroud, every length ending in a hook, blade, or heavy spiked ball. The Chain Devil is approximately 6 feet tall and weighs a bit over 300 pounds, chains included. Driven by innate infernal magic, these chains are not just visual accessories, as they are in fact part of the fiend, a fact that quickly becomes self-evident once you witness them slither and slide over their victims and enemies, looking just as alive as the tentacles of your favorite Lovecraftian horror. Of course, Chain Devils compete with the Kocrachons and the Excruciarchs that we've previously profiled as the prime torturers of the 9 hells, and as you likely know from our profiles thus far, you will rarely find the 3 mixing company. Each have their own preferred locations, and the Kytons are no different, most often being found on Mineros in the Jangling Hitter or at any of the soul intake stations, extracting souls under the watchful eye of Irenes and Omnizu officials. When not torturing souls, the Kyton's fallback role is that of a cruel jailer. More than just a friendly rivalry, hostilities and acrimony forever simmer between Kytons, Excruciarchs, and Kocrachons, all believing they are the sole masters of torment and interrogation, and each thinking the other is inferior. It must also be acknowledged that both the Chain and Pain Devils look further down upon the Kocrachons, who they see as the lesser devil. Now, is that due to the Kocrachons' insect-like form and lesser combat effectiveness, or are the Kytons and Excruciarchs intimidated by the mastery and skill of the little beetle of interrogation? Well, that's for you to decide. Although when looking to differentiate the roles of these 3 primary elite fiends of torment, aside from their contrasting visuals, the largest divide is actually one of ideologies. Where Kytons serve primarily at the many intake stations spread across the 9 hells and work tirelessly to extract soul energy from incoming soul shells, and the Kocrachon operate as subtle students of cruelty, ever fascinated by the anatomical and psychological aspects of delivering pain, Excruciarchs would have to be classified as easily the most sadistic. These artisans of agony openly and perversely revel in the suffering of others. The 2009 Monster Manual 2 for the 4th edition gave us the first variant Chain Devil, appropriately called the Gore Chain Devil. This larger, more powerful variant uses its chains in much the same way to rip and restrain its enemies, but that is where most of the similarities end, as Gore Chain Devils are more prone to rampant rage, used primarily as a set-and-forget bounty hunter type fiend, as the Gore Chain does not have the subtle skill or intelligence required to be an interrogator. As the name implies, these variants are fond of the gory and can often be found in the company of undead creatures. They especially like to coat their chains in the blood of their slain enemies. The Misfortune Devil emerges as a particularly sinister entity in our 18th spot, first introduced in the 4th edition pages of the Monster Manual 2. Misfortune Devils are shape-shifting fiends with strong charisma, both key to their role in the 9 hells. Their innate ability to transform into a mutable, deceptive appearance, often taking on the disguise of a friend, colleague, relative, or even a loved one of a victim, all in order to encourage that target to take unreasonable risks or otherwise lure them into a compromising situation or an unwise decision, always with the payoff being the forfeiture of the victim's soul. As one of a handful of fiends who primarily serve the role of a soul collector, Misfortune Devils, along with the Falxugon and the Vizier Devils, for example, are crucial to the infernal economy that runs on souls as the primary currency. From the exploitation of impulses, addictions, greed, or passion, the essence of the Misfortune Devil lies in their ability to exploit these character flaws, where they adeptly find and abuse their victim's vulnerability to orchestrate scenarios that will yield souls for the 9 hells. And it certainly does not hurt that the Misfortune Devil possesses a lot of probability warping magic to speed that process along. They are a most charismatic fiend, a devil that truly embodies the mantra of enjoying your work, as they derive great personal pleasure from manipulating others into those poor choices. Misfortune Devils are most typically found in the first 3 layers, Avernus, Dis, and Mineros, but also spend a great deal of time on the material plane in order to fulfill their soul-corrupting tasks, searching for individuals prone to risk-taking or those harboring deep-seated desires. Their abilities, as the name suggests, are deceptive and exploitative in nature, altering luck to always swing in their favor, a formidable tool in both social and combat situations. Misfortune Devils are rarely found alone and do try to avoid combat. Should there be no other option, Misfortune Devils prefer subtlety and indirect methods and will most often fall back and let their bodyguards do the job while casting spells such as Ray of Distortion. These karmic fiends excel in turning the tide of battle not through brute strength, but beguiling influence, their power to alter events or cause strategic errors with their lucky maneuverability, making them a most unpredictable opponent. As a 4th edition only devil, you'll need to do some adjusting for 5th edition play. A level 15 devil in 4E, that puts your balancing target for a challenge rating in 5th edition at around CR 9. But so long as a world builder stays true to their theme of lacing encounters with deception and psychological manipulation, the Misfortune Devil has all the makings of providing a cautious encounter for players who will need to be prepared for twists of fate and the unexpected, which is of course a dual-edged sword, as the Devil's heavy reliance on manipulation suggests any number of potential vulnerabilities in direct confrontations. At 17, we find the Harvester or Falxugon Devil, another of a line of fiends introduced to us in the 3rd edition within the pages of the Fiendish Codex II. Legendary deceivers and fiends of persuasion, the Harvester Devil trades battle armor and torture chambers for lavish robes and opulent dining halls. That does not mean the Harvester Devil is less deadly, just deadly in a different way. Likely the best example of the term a handsome devil, the Harvester Devil is an alluring figure of devilish charm and good looks, betrayed only by his small horns and prehensile tail. The Harvester Devil is a solitary schemer, preferring to work alone from other harvesters, but who will almost always be flanked by underling devils and minions who play the part of his bodyguards. A mastery of cunning, manipulation, negotiation, and political intrigue mark the many victorious battles of the Falxugon, all done without the need to draw a blade. Though equipped to hold their own in battle to some degree, Harvester Devils prefer to not get their hands dirty unless it's deemed necessary in order to safeguard their secrets or to secure a contract. Otherwise, they're likely to make a quick exit, leaving their adversaries entangled with minions, summoned Barbazu, or uniquely, various physical impediments, as Harvester Devils love to create and deploy ingenious and unique mechanical traps. Born in the 9 hells of Beator, Harvester Devils are dispatched to the material plane by the rulers of the various domains to ruthlessly scour and secure mortal souls for damnation, thus feeding the hellish economy. As a shape-shifting fiend, Harvesters possess the ability to take on several magic disguises, from a portly human male, a woman of alluring curves, or even removing their own devilish traits of natural form to better seduce mortals into Faustian pacts. The always female Warder Devils represent a unique and somewhat obscure presence in our hierarchy as yet another 4th edition only fiend, slotting in at number 16. Initially angels of protection who succumbed to a darker path, much like the Iranes, their transformation from celestial winged guardians to infernal wingless warriors was marked by their support of Asmodeus during his rebellion. Warder Devils have a striking appearance, graceful form, and skin tones that range from the lightest tint of rose to deep crimsons. They are fierce battle maidens with a singular duty to protect a designated target, whether an archdevil, an official ambassador of hell, or even a petty tyrant. They are fully committed to sacrificing their own existence for the safety of their charge. However, unlike the Erinyes, the metamorphosis of the Water Devil was both physically and symbolically different. This shift in their roles from celestial protectors to infernal guardians, showcasing the transformative nature of the Nine Hells, or even the most noble beings, can become instruments of war and tyranny. Although it is unknown if their form as a warder and not as an Erinyes was a matter of choice or something that was out of their control, the limited lore suggests the latter, all at the behest of Asmodeus. We do know that the Water Devils were once the escorts of Asmodeus' emissaries, who now find their loyalties and services commanded by several powerful denizens across the infernal layers. The most notable of which is Dispater, the overcautious ruler of Dis, who is well known to leverage several Water Devils as part of his own personal entourage of elite bodyguards. Using them so often, it would not be at all uncommon to see 6 or more in his presence on those ultra-rare occasions where the Archdevil is actually seen outside his secluded tower. Water Devils strike me as the infernal version of the Secret Service, and they can be found wherever they're commanded to protect and serve a valuable target. In that service, they wield flaming great swords with deadly precision and possess the ability to teleport short distances, making them formidable opponents on any battlefield. However, their combat strategy revolves around not just engaging enemies, but also strategically marking foes to halt them in their tracks, all to ensure those that they're assigned to protect remain unscathed. Their preferential targeting of bloodied foes in battle also serves to underscore their deep-seated lust for slaughter, a remnant of their angelic past, twisted into a dark bloodlust. Water Devils exhibit formidable combat skills, having been a level 16 Devil in 4th edition, which puts them around CR 9 or 10 in 5th edition, using a very basic, arguable, and generally unreliable conversion, but at least it gets us in the ballpark. One particular obscure rumor of interest involves a fiend named Asailra, an empowered Water Devil who rose to prominence through her dedication and service to Asmodeus. Word among the prime material plane, and given some credibility by infernal scholars, is that Asailra had a not insignificant falling out with the Devil King's own daughter, Glazia, over a shared lover, resulting in her exile from the Hells. If the rumors are true, Asailra is now among the Water Devil entourage protecting Dispater, and with his help has now taken over leadership of Malebranche, where she's been working silently and unseen, hoping to not only impress her new beloved master, Dispater, with her skill and brutality, but also plot her revenge upon the Queen of Malebranche, whom she hates with a burning passion. If you're not familiar with the story of Malebranche, it's a good one. I found it quite enjoyable, and I have a dedicated video to the tale you might enjoy. Link below. At number 15 in our hierarchy are one of the more obscure yet, I think, deserving 4th edition only fiends, the Indwelling Devil. At least I've taken a shine to it. Despite the less than inspired name, these fiends are creatures of stealth and manipulation that should be both feared and respected for their skills of infiltration. Introduced in the 4th edition Planes Above resource, the Indwelling Devil is often best described as a twisted, dark spirit lurking in the shadows unseen as it seeks its next host. Serving as covert spies, infiltrators, and on occasion bounty hunters for the Archdevils, these fiends operate at a level far more advanced than any imp or spine devil could ever hope to achieve. Despite their diminutive size being no bigger than a large imp with clawed hands and reptilian features, their power belies their size. In fact, these fiends are a near-perfect example of the traits that make a great spy or infiltrator: at-will invisibility, and the ability to possess other creatures where they can infiltrate groups, gather information, and subtly influence events to serve the infernal goals of their archdevil masters. This makes them highly effective agents of manipulation, as well as their use in hunting down the escaped souls of notable high-profile targets. Indwelling devils are rarely seen outside a possessed host, using dominated thralls to fight unwitting allies. If expelled from a body, they become vulnerable until finding a new victim, a new host. You could certainly make the argument that as an 18th level 4E fiend, which would put them right around challenge rating 11 that these supreme infiltrators might deserve even a bump or two in the rankings. However, as much as I like their flavor and their role, 4th edition only devils always come with a significant lack of lore, which is one of several important core factors I used to determine their placement. The only real obscure lore that we have on the Indwelling Fiend is a persistent rumor that all Indwelling devils actually work directly for and serve the Inquisitor of Hell, the Archdevil Fomgor. Fomgor, for those who are unaware, is a direct vassal and some would say the right hand of Asmodeus, serving the Lord of Lies in his Malsheem citadel in Nessus. This only serves to amplify their status as potentially the powerful unseen agents of Asmodeus himself. From their infernal perches upon the citadels of Maladomini and Nessus, our 14th rank fiend looks to rain down ruin on its enemies in a storm of thunder and lightning, the appropriate, if not creatively named, Storm Devil. Storm Devils are hulking blue-skinned fiends with tattered leathery black wings, serving mainly in the lower layers of hell and introduced in the 4th edition Manual of the Planes. As their name implies, Storm Devils are the personification of the controlled fury of Tempest, able to create cyclones, launching lightning bolts, and projecting infernal thunderclaps, all wreaking havoc upon their foes. Despite their tendency to begin each attack from an elevated position, they are in fact pretty clumsy flyers, preferring to secure a vantage point from which they can bombard enemies with their elemental attacks before landing to continue their assault. Using this tactical approach to combat, they are predominantly deployed as artillery of infernal legions, almost acting as walking siege engines. Storm Devils come to us from 4E as a level 23 fiend, quite formidable and roughly translating to a challenge rating of about 15, which powers their placement as a rank 14 devil. However, in my research on some obscure lore for the Storm Devil, I quickly learned that this fiend is destined to not rise any higher and are in fact one of the most likely to receive a harsh demotion. You see, within the rigid and ordered structure of Hell's armies, Storm Devils are constantly pushing the boundaries and their luck, as their belligerent and unruly nature sees them routinely disobeying orders and abandoning posts in order to chase kills, torment lesser demons, or otherwise seeking their own personal glory at the expense of a greater goal. In researching every fiend for this volume, I think the Storm Devil is easily the most, dare I say, chaotic and demon-like of the devils I can recall. As such, they are only tolerated because of their strong abilities and are often put into companies led by pit fiends, one of the few devils that can really keep them in order. Quite possibly one of the many reasons these powerful but rebellious fiends never made it to the 5th edition. Next up is a fiend that, unlike the Storm Devil I just profiled, has made it over to 5th edition, but it arrives here at a rank 13 only begrudgingly, as the Orthon and I have a bit of a beef. And it starts with the fiend's reintroduction to the game in 5th edition by way of Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, where we see many changes, and at least to this narrator, none of them are good. In fact, the Orthon, a brutish devil in 3rd edition that I particularly quite liked for its unique flavor, has come to the current generation as a step back and a regression in every facet except its rank and challenge rating, which have both been oddly boosted. In my opinion, the changes seen with 5e have, for all intents and purposes, created an entirely new devil that only shares a name with its former self. The first thing you will notice is that I have myself demoted the Orthon back to a lesser devil, even though it must be noted that according to the last 5th edition update, it was for some reason bestowed greater devil status. This is something I just really think Wizards got wrong, but your mileage may vary, so I want to be very clear and upfront that my pulling the Orthon back down into the lesser tier of Batazu, and not even a top tier of the lesser tier, may be controversial to some. But to me, and my table and my world-building efforts, it is only logical that they are a lesser devil. Heck, just looking at the stat block and abilities of the Orthon, and then comparing it against, for example, the lesser-ranked Bone Devil, and it's very clear to me that this retconned and empowered Orthon Devil is still not worthy of the greater devil status bequeathed him by those ivory-towered wizards on the coast. But Rich, I hear you say, you prefaced this whole volume explaining that power alone does not make the rank. And yes, that is absolutely correct. We also look at the lore and history, their role, their importance, along with any unique traits that make them worthy. But even here, there's nothing particularly special about the Orthon's role. In fact, the 5e Orthon has a completely retconned and new role. It's a bit bewildering in and of itself, something I'll get to in just a moment. But let's take a minute to profile this crossbow-loving devil orc, as I like to call them, and see how it stacks up, so you can make your own decision on its placement and fate. When originally introduced in the 3rd edition, the challenge rating 8 Orthon was a horrible sight to behold. A large, hulking, and hideous fiend, this towering monstrosity was encased in sheets of rusty and mismatched metal. The iron and spiked plates bolted mercilessly right onto its very flesh, while dark, bloody ichor dripped from the bolts and nails securing its armor in place. Just a hint of Warhammer visuals painting a ghastly sight. Its features are terrible, contorted in a perpetual grimace of pain, with large tusks jutting from its massive maw, while worms writhe in the open wounds across its face and body. And its role at that time was a demon-hating, visceral soldier of Hell's legions, fighting with a bloodlust for melee combat, but smart enough to wound its foes at range with its crossbow as it closed ranks. And if you were able to kill an Orthon, its body would then burst into a shower of those same worms upon its demise, causing significant harm in a form of Diablo-esque corpse explosion. But my oh my how the times have changed, and I think we can now clearly see the impetus for such a massive rewrite. While I would hesitate to call the 5e Orthon of today neither warm nor cuddly, they have most certainly evolved to a more PC-appropriate state. Make no mistake, the Orthon is still deadly and retains its explosive death, but 5e has traded writhing worms for, well, fire, just plain old fire. And their role has changed as well. Those melee-loving, demon-seeking Orthons have traded their flesh-bolted plate armor and infernal army stripes for a cape and sharp senses to now serve as a tracker across the 9 hells. Kinda like Shrek meets Boba Fett. I can't help but think this new role feels forced. This hefty 8-foot-tall, 500-pound brute is not the image I conjure when thinking about an expert tracker. Was this due to a stretched logic leap in design because they previously used a crossbow as a secondary weapon? Whatever the case, the new Orthon does come to 5e empowered with better crossbow abilities, an improved CR, and the ability to, weirdly, go invisible, losing its signature Hell Spear and teleport abilities. The new lore states that as trackers and bounty hunters, they are well-traveled across the hells, and as such are exceptional guides, so I guess there's that. But with an AC of 17, hit points of 105, some decent crossbow effects, improved senses, and now this invisibility field, they still just do not, in my opinion, stack up with even the lesser Bone Devil, who has an AC of 19, hit points of 142, a poisonous sting, and the ability to fly. But I've merely provided the information for your review. What do you think? Is the Orthon worthy of its greater Barbazu ranking? Did I miss something? Which version do you prefer? Let me know in the comments. For some obscure lore on the Orthon, we do look back at the 3rd edition version, which had a unique and quite rare ability among devils, called Dimensional Interference. With it, the Orthon could at will emit a field 20 feet in radius that disrupts any extra-dimensional movement with no save. Pretty nice, but it's gone in 5e. Edging closer to our top 10, we find the rank 12 Brachina, or Pleasure Devil, the always female fiend with long silky hair and lush colored pools for eyes. She is dressed in revealing garb, and a smile plays on her lips. Even as her intoxicating eyes promise countless pleasures, her swollen lips purse to kiss, something sinister seems to lie behind her otherwise flawless facade. A Pleasure Devil is in reality a lower form of Erinny's Devil, and an expert at turning its enemies into allies. Specially selected among the fallen angel Erinny's devils, Brachinas are lifted from their station and endowed with even greater beauty and a new set of powers better suited to their new role. Charged with corrupting the virtuous, they travel to the material plane to work their evil, returning to the 9 hells only when they have succeeded in their task. They are well aware that their punishment for failure is severe, thus all pleasure devils work doubly hard to corrupt their victims. Even in its natural form, a Brachina is a vision of beauty, something akin to a dark angel. She stands a little over 5 feet tall and weighs approximately 120 pounds. Pale skin, long hair, black eyes, to go along with a pair of feathery black wings. But of course, pleasure devils possess strong at-will magic to conceal all of their fiendish nature, allowing them to take the likeness of whatever their target might be most attracted to. Pleasure devils enjoy roaming and remaining upon the material plane, relishing any chance to escape the ugliness of the 9 hells. To the Brachina, the material plane is ripe for the plucking, and they are known to be one of the better producing fiends in terms of souls contracted and captured. When they do find themselves in the 9 hells, pleasure devils plot and connive like all the rest, grasping at the chance to rise in status to one day join the ranks of the pit fiends. This includes a tendency to betray others of their kind if it means moving ahead. With a 3rd edition challenge rating of 11 and some of the strongest charm abilities as you would assume, the pleasure devil is among the strongest of corrupting fiends and certainly worthy of their position in this ranking. While not an official variant of the pleasure devil, this is as good a place as any to talk about the 4e introduced passion devil. Although I'm going to quickly profile them, I chose to not give them their own hierarchical ranking. While succubi are demonic tonnerie traditionally associated with seduction and manipulation, the passion devil somewhat fill this niche within the realm of the devils, created by and serving specifically the archdevil Fierna in Phlegethos. While I wouldn't blame anyone for thinking these two devils are the same, the passion devils do possess a few distinct traits that differentiate them from the pleasure devils. They are characterized by their extreme vanity, mirroring Fierna's own, a fact illustrated by each passion devil having an inherent flaw in their form to ensure their mistress remains the most beautiful. One is a 3rd edition fiend, the other is from the 4th, and neither exists in the 5th edition, likely because of their less than PG nature. However, I think either or both can serve a role as the female version of a harvester devil, so I've included both, but your mileage on their use may vary. In the bleak, lonesome depths of Nessus, the 9th layer of hell, lies Malebranche, the sinister fortress of Asmodeus. And within its opulent dark halls dwell an elite force of ferocious fiends, each standing well over 10 feet tall and encased in hell-forged brass armor. Relentless guardians that swarm any trespassers, they are the most loyal and fierce defenders of their unholy lord and master. If you told me I could only have one 4th edition only fiend in my entire hierarchy, the Brazen Devil, slotting just outside the top 10 at number 11, would be my pick. The Brazen Devils occupy a piece of holdover lore from the 4th edition that is, at least in my world, still canon. The elite Malebranche Guard, a force of 1,001 said to be made entirely of Brazen Devils, comprising only the most loyal and skilled of devil kind. They are the embodiment of lawful obedience, wholly devoted to protecting Asmodeus and his palace grounds and serving as his personal bodyguard. When one falls, another takes its place in short order. Unlike the ambitious pit fiends, Brazen Devils crave only to serve, devoid of schemes or agendas. Each Brazen Devil is hand-picked and forged only from the worthiest and most acclaimed of the lesser and greater devil ranks, transformed and fitted into their hell-forged brass shells through promotion. As a level 28 4th edition fiend, that would roughly translate to a CR 17. In battle, Brazen Devils have an entire arsenal at their disposal, from a Hellfire Aura, a Hellfire ranged attack, and 2 types of teleportation. But their signature attack is Furious Assault, a devastating combination that does significant physical damage, then pushes their target backwards, followed by an immediate teleport to the target's new location in order to maintain pressure on the foe and protect their master. Asmodeus trusts these steadfast guards above all others, assigning them his most critical tasks. Their single-minded purpose: protect their Dark Lord and his stronghold until the end of days. For some Brazen Devil obscure lore, let's talk about that ritual of promotion. The creation of the Brazen Devil involves one of the more grim rituals, rewarding those highest achieving devils with their bodies being carved and sliced to pieces that are then stuffed into and melded with the hell-forged brass armor, mixing with the hot liquid brass as it's forged. It is said the agony and torment of this brutal transformation is required to strip the fiend of any personal ambition or ability to be corrupted. Yeah, it sounds like something a devil might say. Regardless, once complete, you have the towering Brazen Devil, their armor now forever bound to them, signifying their unyielding loyalty and service to the sovereign ruler of the Nine Hells. We finally reach the top 10 where we have a clustered mess. If you're not intrigued or fascinated by the history and version lore of these fiendish devils, then you would be best served just skipping this one entirely. Say the Malebranche is just another name for the Horned Devil and walk away, mostly unscathed. No one would blame you. But if we want to create a definitive volume on all the devils, which I do, then we can't just sweep this one under the rug because it's not convenient or a simple profile. But the truth is, I added, removed, and re-slotted the Malebranche up, down, on, and off this hierarchy several times before my lore OCD simply wouldn't allow me to forget they ever existed. Plus, I'm a bit of a sucker for a peek behind the curtain when it comes to the warts and retcons of D&D lore. So here we are, and if you're still with me, then I'll do my level best to make sense of one of the more bewildering of fiendish conflicts. The complex relationship between the Malebranche, aka the War Devil, and the Cornugon Devil is one of historical convergence, divergence, indecision, too many writers, inadequate proofreading, and maybe a little bit of lazy retconning. This fragmented version-to-version design is one of those rare behind-the-scenes looks into the long-term publishing landscape, reflecting the large shifts in the game's design philosophy through the various interpretations and a lack of consensus among ever-changing authors. But I would like to try and untangle this web of confusion to reach some form of consensus. In the first edition of the game, we only had the Malebranche, the Italian word for evil claws, or in the case of this devil, evil horns. So I guess technically this means the Malebranche existed first, although even that is a bit arguable should one desire to be pedantic about it. The Malebranche were ferocious devils known to wield various polearms or spiked chains. By the second edition, the Malebranche devils became known as Cornugon, and while no Malebranche was published in second edition, the new Cornugon horned devils maintained nearly identical characteristics, thus establishing a basis for this ever-evolving, if confusing, connection between the two. The third edition then gave us our first clear and distinct separation. First, we have the Monster Manual for 3.5 that gives us the Cornugon Horned Devil. Red skin, 2 horns, 9 feet tall, wielding those same spiked chains and polearms, and boasting a challenge rating of 16, and most importantly, greater devil status. In the same third edition, we also find the Malebranche as a brutal, hulking challenge rating 14 fiend, with black hide, feral eyes, and you guessed it, 2 curved horns. Of special note, while these Malebranche are lesser devils, they were on par stat-wise with the Cornugon, actually having more health, similar attacks, but were far larger, weighing 10 tons, that's 20,000 pounds, and standing at over 22 feet tall. That is literally twice the size of a Cornugon and nearly twice the size of a pit fiend. This is a shockingly large fiend. Then in my research I found a lore note that stated these devils do tend to vary in size quite a bit. So I naturally thought, okay, that makes more sense. A 22-foot tall, 10-ton Malebranche is that rare exception, the outlier. No. The lore actually tells us that some variants have been known to reach, get this, 60 feet tall and weigh in at over 125 tons. That's 250,000 pounds, or the weight of not 1, not 2, but just shy of 3 empty Boeing 737s. Which, if I'm being honest here, really seems not well researched, and in fact is kind of limiting in how the fiend would be used, only hurting what is otherwise a pretty strong case for the devil's inclusion. This confusion was only enhanced by a thorough lack of proofreading in what is still considered by many to be the largest and most definitive official resource on the fiends to date. I'm of course talking about the still excellent but far from flawless Fiendish Codex II, Tyrants of the Nine Hells, where the Malebranche was introduced. A great resource to be sure, but wow, the inconsistencies in this book are glaring, both in the classification as both lesser and greater devils across many devil types, in different sections, in the same book, along with contradictions regarding how they come to be. Honestly, it's a bit of a mess, which does nothing to bolster confidence in these two separate and distinct fiends. Regardless, at this stage we now have clear distinction between the Malebranche and the Cornugon. Okay, cool, it's all settled then. Yeah, no, not at all. So close, but then 4th edition comes along. Why is it always 4th edition? Throwing gasoline on the almost settled fire, 4E gives us only the Malebranche, which they also renamed the War Devil. We know the War Devil is the Malebranche because in true 4th edition fashion, they actually reused the 3rd edition Malebranche art. You can't make this stuff up. The key takeaway here is that there is no Cornugon for the entirety of the 4th edition, which only served to add a whole new layer of confusion to an already maddening and inconsistent history. I think as we moved into the 5th edition, the designers looked at all this history, all this conflicted history, and those authors with the same WTF side-eye as I did, and decided to just merge the two, cleaning the slate, selecting the Cornugon as the name, and calling it a day. So where does that leave us? Do we have two separate devils or a single devil with a checkered and schizophrenic history? Well, I've made no bones about my chosen editions for the best lore being the 2nd and 3rd edition, and obviously I have it listed here at the upper end of the lesser devils, but not without some caveats. Truth be told, the 3rd edition did a fantastic job of creating two distinctly different fiends if you can use the canonically stated variable size of the devil to limit and maybe even reduce the enormity of the Malebranche in your world. The 3rd edition otherwise has the Malebranche now playing the role of a brutal and blunt instrument of destruction, a powerful but dense bully that could be a lot of fun and is very different than the Horn Devil. However, I must absolutely concede that their significantly intertwined history and the ridiculous size of the Malebranche certainly reflect a continuity that one could posit best binds them together. I have them occupying in my world and listed here for your review, but this is one case where I fully understand why they were merged in 5th edition and why you might do the same in your world. Whatever role, if any, the Malebranche plays in your world, it is still one of the more interesting devil lore profiles, well worth sharing with you today. Landing in the number 9 spot on our grand infernal hierarchy, the Bone Devil has breached the top 10. Too bad there are only 8 greater devils in my hierarchy. But I guess it depends on your perspective, because that also means this Oceloth sits at the top of the lesser devil tier. So glass half full? Either way, the Bone Devil, a longtime fan favorite, introduced in the very first monster manual for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons in 1977, is a terrifying sight, and one of the few devils whose visual appearance has improved with its changes across versions, transforming from a slender, wretched skeletal humanoid with an oversized scorpion-like tail to something truly wicked, especially as lesser devils go. Yet if you read and compare the description text from 3rd edition all the way to 5th edition, they are nearly word for word the same and clearly not representative of the 5e form as it has changed. Seems a little lazy. But let me paint a far more accurate verbal image for your mind's eye. Across the fiery and frozen landscapes of the Nine Hells lurks a terrifying fiend of spiked bone and jagged spines. Its form, a mix of remorseless predator, ancient death, and infernal terrors, is fused whole as a profane calcification of bones and the pungent stench of decay and rot. This is the Bone Devil, and it soars impossibly on skeletal wings, casting a dark shadow upon the lands below. Its terrifying claws cradle the power to rend flesh, its venomous tail the toxin to extinguish life. This fiend is a harbinger of cruelty with an incessant appetite to cause suffering. A master of torment, this taskmaster fiend revels in the despair of the weak, drawing pleasure from their cries of agony. There, that's better. Driven by hate and envy, Bone Devils act as the cruel taskmasters of the Nine Hells, and some ancient resources even refer to the Bone Devils as a policing force charged with upholding the lawful codes of hell. Whatever the role, there is no argument that Oceloths are a cruel lot who give no respite in their directing of weaker devils to work on the various tasks for their masters, and they find special enjoyment in the sight of any fiend that defies them as they are punished and or demoted. While Bone Devils are the strictest of taskmasters, at the same time they too long for promotion, looking to make the greater Barbazu ranks. They are eternally bitter and envious of their superiors, even as they diligently and dutifully attempt to curry their favor, seething with hate at every insubordinate step. Though devastating in combat with their claws, Bone Devils may also wield hooked polearms made of bone, used to subdue enemies before striking with their venomous scorpion-like tails. But it's not just their physical prowess that gets flexed when violence is called upon. Bone Devils possess a strong fear aura, can turn both invisible and create walls of ice, and are also able to conjure powerful illusions to trick or frighten their enemies. And while all of these innate skills will be put to use in combat, their likely early action would be to summon minion fiends to engage on their behalf. Oceloths have some pretty impressive summoning powers, especially as lesser devils go. Possibly the most impressive is their innate ability to gate up to 100 of the shrieking Nupperibo devils. As weak as these least devils are, 100 of anything would create enough confusion and distraction to at the very least allow the Oceloth to take flight and escape a bad situation. While the Oceloth retain their same challenge rating of 9 from 3rd edition, they did seem, surprisingly to me, at least from my research, to lose both their fear aura and invisibility in 5e, which is a bit of a shame. Still, the Bone Devil is both a terrifying devil with rich lore and a dynamic role in both the Nine Hells and at your table, making them well worth the top spot on the lesser tier. Now, among my personal favorite of the obscure lore we're sharing today comes to us from the Planescape setting in 2nd edition, and I actually feel bad that I can only touch upon it now, but it truly deserves significantly more time as either part of a future profile dedicated to the Bone Devil or even its own lore video altogether. Regardless, I would still be remiss to not at least mention it here. From the 50,000-foot view, this Planescape lore tells us of an event that occurs only once per century, where the highest performing Oceloths are bestowed the honor of assisting the Dark Eight Council. They do so in determining the promotion of new pit fiends. It is called the Ring of Cantrum, and there are a lot of interesting details to share and a ton of nuance that needs to be discussed, especially with all the canonical changes that would, if following the canonical letter of the law, invalidate this and really most any lore that is this detailed from previous versions, something I always look to try and preserve. Again, this will need to wait for a full Oceloth profile, but I will say in closing that this promotion lore makes a very strong case for the Bone Devil being one of, if not the, most respected of the lesser devils, only further amplifying my issue with the Orthon being, in any way, a more significant or higher-ranked fiend. As we enter the third and final tier, the Greater Devils, we find one of my personal favorite fiends, the Assassin Devil, added to our hierarchy and occupying the number 8 spot. One of the most glaring gaps in the current canonical hierarchy is a clear lack of any legitimate spymaster fiends. And this is a huge oversight. I mean, come on, this is the Nine Hells, where covert infiltration, underhanded maneuvering, information gathering, backroom dealings, and outright assassinations are part of the daily political landscape. And when a challenge rating 2 Spine Devil is the best you can do, well, that means you've removed clandestine gameplay from your world, which is unacceptable in my book. So in taking the Orthon out of the greater devil tier, I wanted to replace it with a fiend both worthy of that greater title and able to infuse this missing dynamic. And I think the Assassin Devil, or Dogai, as they are sometimes called, provides that in spades and is more deserving of greater devil status. A stealthy and deadly humanoid devil present in both the 3rd and 4th edition, I was actually surprised that the Assassin Devil was never introduced into 5th edition. A master assassin with some storied lore, exceptional mechanics, that fits perfectly in the 9 Hells. But alas, maybe the Dogai does not fit in the game's slow march towards G-rated content. But that matters not, because the Assassin Devil is alive and well at my table. Infernal legends in Candlekeep tell us that the first Dogai were nothing more than mere shadows of vaguely sentient and malicious will. However, Asmodeus ordered these shadow creatures to be collected and purified in a pit of hellfire, where their essence was reforged into the Assassin Devils of today. The solitary Assassin Devil prefers to work alone. These devils of shadow and fog have gray-hued skin, and most of them burning orange or red eyes. Rarely seen or identified until they wish to be, Assassin Devils often hang in the shadows, but when they do make their presence known, you will first notice without a doubt a most disturbing, wicked, and fixed smile that drips with their sinister intent. It curves menacingly and unchanging, revealing bright, almost magically illuminated bone-white teeth. Assassin Devils are the silent killers of the 9 Hells, expert infiltrators and skilled saboteurs that serve the higher-level Barbazu when a master-level spy or assassin is required. And they are the perfect instruments of a wide range of political espionage, coups d'etats, and when a single entrenched political threat requires removal with extreme prejudice. Ruthless and cold, Dogai never hesitate, they have no remorse, and take great pride in their murderous craft. When in combat, the Assassin Devils wield weapons imbued with necrotic energy to cause grievous wounds undetected until their blades separate skin. They use well-timed teleportation magic and always employ hit-and-run tactics, as these Shadow Fiends never engage in open combat unless it is clearly on their terms. They would far prefer to strike from the shadows with no warning, and most will find it just about impossible to corner a Dogai since it teleports away as soon as it faces any serious threat. Easily the sneakiest of the rank-and-file Barbazu, they possess all the core abilities to move unseen and escape tricky situations, from their exceptional mobility to spell-like abilities ranging from Cloud of Fog and Shadow Step to a Shadow Form, At-Will Dimension Door, and even a greater teleport ability. The Assassin Devil absolutely lives up to its renowned legend of a silent terror. Yet they dwell on the fringes of Barbazu's society, working unseen to enforce their master's will and spend a great deal of time on the material plane. You see, while the Assassin Devil is one of the purest natives of Hell, having been birthed from its very flames, Dogai are in no way an outlander, but they are most certainly an outcast of infernal society, as very few devils will trust them. Most devils hate them, and all devils fear them. And the reasoning for this outcast hatred leads us to one of the more interesting of their characteristics, lying in their removal from a near-universal fiendish ability. You'll recall at the beginning of this profile I told you that the Dogai work alone. Not some of the time, not most of the time, but 100% of the time. While more than one Dogai might be present on rare occasions, when I say alone, I mean you will never see an Assassin Devil working alongside or near any other type of devil. This is so woven into their lone wolf lore that the Dogai is the only substantial devil of the 9 Hells that possesses no ability to summon other devils for support. In return, they are given free rein by Asmodeus himself to slay any devil or being without fear of official punishment. This fact alone embodies why the Assassin Devil is so dread and despised. For some really obscure lore on the Assassin Devil, I set out to try and find the origin of their alternative name, Dogai. The earliest in-game reference I found dates back to Dragon Magazine number 29, which lists a number of mythologies from the Pacific Islands. This article references a Dogai as a strange, shape-shifting humanoid that often impersonates a man's wife with the intent to seduce. This folk entity has reversed joints and exceedingly large ears and hands, with their true form being most hideous. Now keep in mind, this was back in 1979, and the Dogai would not be introduced as a devil into the game for almost exactly 30 years. So I had no clue if or how that related or morphed into the Assassin Devil 3 decades later, but it did intrigue me enough to keep searching, turning my focus to real-world mythologies. My first hit came from a Fijian dictionary, which contains some folklore native to the Melanesian people. While that Dragon Magazine article took some liberties, that fantasy Dogai was ground in some truth. There I found references to the Dogai as a spiritual belief in a sickness of the mind and body that inflicts a younger male to seduce an older woman, which I found a bit humorous. Cougar Town came to my mind immediately. But another 2 hours of rabbit holes later, I found that according to the mythology of the people of the Torres Strait Islands, which is an archipelago of approximately 274 small northern islands between Australia and New Guinea, the Dogai is said to be a female witch-like creature of some charm. The Dogai often lives in the shadows or underground, has huge ears, long legs, sharp features, and are said to always be on the lookout for a human male to kidnap and keep as its husband. And while this clearly is not the Assassin Devil of today, and one can posit they have no connection, given the Dragon Magazine find, I feel pretty confident that at some point this mythology was considered in the making of the way cooler Assassin Devil Dogai of today. Besides, I spent 3 hours researching this, so worst case, you learned a little folklore from the oceanic people. But just in case you feel that obscure lore was too far off the mark, let me provide something well woven into the lore of the actual devil. Rumors exist that a select group of independent Dogai have broken free of Hell's infernal order, and they seek to grow their numbers and status on the prime material plane. I find this canonical lore to be an exceptional basis from which to build an entire campaign around, something I just might do for our dedicated video, as there is still a lot to share with the Assassin Devil. But regardless of its ear size, the Dogai or Assassin Devil is a deadly fiend of infiltration and execution. Always on the move in search of its target, most devils assume the absolute worst when one of these silent shadow killers appear. So much so that even the mightiest of fiendish bullies in hell give these devils a wide berth. In fact, there's a common saying in the Outer Planes that sums up the Dogai best. The Assassin Devil you see is the Assassin Devil sent to kill you. With the confusing mess of the War Devil Malebranche now hopefully cleared up a little, we can now focus on the Cornugon or Horn Devil. No longer sitting at the bottom of the greater tier, these elite defenders of the Nine Hells stand alone as our 7th rank Greater Devil. Standing up to 9 feet tall and a muscular 600 pounds, the Horn Devil with its massive bat-like wings is an intimidating sight, even among the Barbazu. Horn Devils are considered valuable assets in the Nine Hells, prized among the pit fiends and archdevils of Beator. Renowned for their loyal and militaristic discipline, the Cornugon can be counted on to not only follow orders, but they're intelligent and cunning enough to not always require constant monitoring. Now, if that statement rings hollow, then we can safely say your familiarity with the Horn Devils is limited to the 5th edition, because sure enough, that disciplined nature describing the fiend from the 3rd edition lore has certainly been challenged in the sparse amount of lore we're given in its move to 5th edition, along with its massive nerf from CR 16 to a challenge rating of 11. In 5e, the Horn Devils are now painted as lazy to the point of belligerence. Why the 180-degree switch? Your guess is as good as mine, so take that for what it's worth in your world-building efforts. I'm ignoring it in mine. Like many devils coming to 5e, things change, and for the Cornugon, not only did they lose 5 levels of challenge rating, but many of their former abilities have been removed in favor of, I guess, streamlining the game. This includes an array of spell-like abilities such as lightning bolts and stuns, a fear aura, with only the Tailstrike Infernal Wound and a Hurl Flame ability spared and present in 5th edition. I have to admit that I like the Horn Devil, but I don't really like the 5e Horn Devil. And truth told, if we're going off 5th edition only, I'm not sure they continue to warrant Greater Devil status. However, the Horn Devil is one of the OG and iconic Fiends, and I don't have the heart to demote it like WotC did, so they will just get some of their 3rd edition swag back at my table. The Faces of Evil resource from the 2nd edition gives us our Horn Devil obscure lore. There we learn that Cornugons who demonstrate exceptional ability are allowed to serve as part of a specialized unit of 106 of the most accomplished Horn Devils. This elite devil company is tasked with guarding the Dark Eight, though not for long. This elite unit is so prestigious that most Horn Devils in their ranks are promoted rapidly, the infernal version of a fast track up the corporate ladder. In the 9 Hells, the skies are alight with the dark beauty and unholy radiance of the Erinyes Devils, who occupy our hierarchy as the rank 6 Greater Devil. The Erinyes derive their name from Greek mythology, where the Erinyes were phonic deities of vengeance and retribution. The etymology of the word itself likely stems from the Greek word eris, meaning strife. In Greek mythology, their role was to punish those who committed crimes against the natural order, particularly those involving family ties and oaths. The Erinyes were later adopted into Roman mythology as a name even more common to most as the Furies. Their association with vengeance and punishment was further solidified when their influence extended into early literature and art, appearing in such works as Eumenides by Aeschylus and, of course, Dante Alighieri's Inferno. The Erinyes Devils are considered by most scholars to be the OG of the unnamed rank-and-file devil types, first making their appearance in the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Monster Manual published in 1977. But more than that, the lore goes on to tell us that in at least one of the origin stories for Asmodeus and the 9 Hells, the original Erinyes were once angels among Asmodeus's dark celestial legion who followed the Lord of Lies into the 9 Hells. Today, those descendants are the bewitching scourge of Hell's skies, the Furies of Hell. With their statuesque frames standing just under 6 feet tall and weighing around 150 pounds, Erinyes are hauntingly beautiful, adorned with large feathery wings and eyes that smolder red. Erinyes are to me the prototypical example showing that there is more to a greater devil than just their combat abilities. While they are not the most formidable among the Barbazu ranks, they are one of the most respected and envied among the devil types. Erinyes serve the archdevils of the 9 Hells in a variety of ways, from enforcers and punishments of the lawful codes of Hell to the tracking and hunting of those who have escaped infernal justice. Additionally, you can often find them acting as overseers, monitoring the various soul intake stations across the planes of Hell, representing the interests of their master by ensuring there is no corruption in the soul count. Erinyes have also been known to lead infernal companies in the Blood War on occasion, but for most, their loyalty, intelligence, and versatility make them valuable assets not to be wasted upon the battlefield. While Erinyes inhabit all layers across the 9 Hells, they are particularly prevalent on Dis and Stygia, treasured by the archdevils Dispater and Levistus. They also enjoy favor in Glasia's court on Malebranche, the 6th layer, where they are entrusted with missions of seduction and corruption. Unique among devil kind, it is said that few are the Erinyes that actively seek promotion. While you might think this is because they are the most beautiful and angelic-like among the rank-and-file devils, and that is a good reason to be sure, however, the lore provides us the true reason for their desire to forever remain as they are: procreation. Erinyes, along with the Brachina, who the lore suggests share a bit of heritage, are the only 2 devil types who retain the ability to create and carry offspring, often hiding their young in secluded colonies. The lore also whispers one example that confirms the 4th promotion rule we covered at the outset of this volume, suggesting that only a finite number of Iranies may exist at any time, that number being 500, this elevating their overall rarity and boosting the allure to hold that station. To find obscure lore on the Iranies, we need to look no further than the 4th edition, where one of the more senseless creature retcons was ever made. The 4th edition so wanted to set itself apart from previous versions that, unbelievably, the powers that be thought it would be a good idea to transform the Iranies from their dark angelic form to a wingless, armored melee devil with cloven hooves. A vile change if ever one existed, and a creature that will find no quarter at my table. My advice to any world builders that can now never unhear this horror from which I spoke would be to chalk that up to a specific group of Iranies, transformed by Asmodeus for any number of homebrew reasons that best fit into your world. And in fact, you have my apologies for even sharing such a ridiculous retcon. Across the grim landscapes of the Nine Hells, we see the Narzugon Devil, also frequently called the Hell Knight, gallop atop its nightmare steed and break into our top 5 of rank-and-file devils, something that would have seemed impossible during the 3rd edition. If you are only familiar with the 5th edition of our lore, then this placement by Grilee Tomekeeper as a greater devil feels right at home. However, like many of the devils being profiled today, we've seen some wild swings in the power levels of a few devils as they have come into 5th edition. The bearded and horned devils come to mind, as both saw a significant drop in power from their 3rd edition status. But on the flip side of the infernal coin, the Narzugon is one of 2 devils in particular that have seen nothing short of a massive spike in power with their incarnation in the 5th edition. First introduced into our realms in the 3rd edition resource Manual of the Planes, the Narzugon came to be as a CR9 or CR10 devil, another instance of inconsistency in the same book, but nonetheless was nerfed to a challenge rating 5 by the time it was added to the Fiendish Codex 2 some 5 years later as part of version 3.5. By the 4th edition, the devil was rebranded into a Hell Knight of 15th level, before the Fiend was properly walked back to its proper name as a Narzugon in 5th edition, coming in hot, pun intended, as a CR13 Greater Devil. The Narzugon is a Barbazu of the 9 Hells of fire and brimstone that emerges from their tragic valor and loyalty to a code that, in the end, corrupted them into perhaps one of the truest forms of lawful evil. As mortals, they were once noble paladins or knights, dutiful soldiers or military commanders. And while many undoubtedly began their chosen path as paragons of virtue or defenders of the innocent, they inevitably fell from that grace, either through their own twisted interpretation of order and code, or shattering their oaths through the making of infernal pacts, or even as the victim of some insidious deceptions. Either way, upon their mortal death, these evil souls landing upon the shores of the 9 Hells have been forged anew in the fires of Beator as the epitome of lawful evil, as a dark mockery of their past. Encased in ominous, full-plate armor and often sitting atop a nightmarish steed that breathes flames and bellows smoke, this hellish cavalier no doubt presents one of the more intimidating of visuals. As the elite cavalry of the infernal realms, these infernal knights are well known for their prowess in combat, a strict adherence to the chain of command, and possessing a perverted sense of remnant honor rarely found in other devils. This all serves to make the Narzugon exceptionally reliable, a fact illustrated as Narzugons are often the go-to troops for many archdevils when a difficult mission requires its best chance at assured success. Across the outer planes or even upon the mortal world, Hell Knights are often trusted to accomplish these uniquely specific malevolent tasks, be it the destruction of a temple dedicated to a good deity, the recovery of a dark artifact, or leading a diabolical cult to wage war against the forces of chaos. In these scenarios, the unshakable reliability of a Narzugon makes them one of the few infernal entities that are trusted to operate independently and unsupervised over extended periods of time. In combat, the Narzugon will always make extensive use of their mounts abilities, charging to maximize the damage from their lances or alternative weapons and abilities. And if you see the Narzugon make maneuvers upon its steed that you thought impossible, maybe it's infernal magic, but know that there exists no more a skilled being, fiend or otherwise, in the art of mounted combat. Though quick to fight, a Narzugon will never sacrifice their steed needlessly, always operating with their well-being in mind. But the unique qualities of the Narzugon do not end there. While any hero should know to never mistake that this Hell Knight is as evil as they come, yet many accounts still exist where the devil has extended its enemy a measure of unexpected honor in combat. It may well be a dark and perverse form of the virtue, but it exists nonetheless. Stories circulate of Narzugon offering enemies the chance to surrender, or even pausing to allow a disarmed opponent to reclaim their weapon. A Narzugon will never let the environment or a chance fumble steal his victory. Just a few fragments of the lore to keep top of mind should you find yourself in an encounter with the Hell Knight. I'm also compelled, for the sake of thoroughness, to mention an aspect of the 4th edition lore which added a few traits to the Narzugon that I personally detest. To me, they only serve to myopically support an origin story retcon and really detract from its appeal in world building. But you may feel differently, so I want to briefly cover them. In the 4th edition Monster Manual 3, the Narzugon is intimately tied to the He Who Was origin story, having served that god as a celestial knight. Asmodeus, having tricked them somehow as part of his betrayal of that 4th edition god, damned these knights to forever serve the Lord of Lies in hell. But this retconned lore goes on to say that the Hell Knights now hate everything because of this betrayal, that Narzugons are fueled only by that hate in all that they do because they cannot gain forgiveness, bound to eternally follow orders for a cause they know is wrong. This, in my opinion, is such a departure from the established lore as to almost be offensive. It is these types of nonsense lore changes that are my biggest gripes with the 4th edition. And while 5e has tried to walk back a lot of the more egregious examples of 4th edition, its given lore on the Narzugon is sparse and doesn't really confirm or retcon that most ridiculous aspect of this greater devil. I would of course recommend you ignore that 4th edition lore altogether. Truth told, I debated not even mentioning it, but that's my bias dripping all over the keyboard. But let's not close out the Narzugon on a sour note. I have 2 additional pieces of obscure lore that world builders and DMs might find interesting. I most certainly do. The first exists in a 3rd edition skill that did not carry into the 5th edition that I personally find better used as some lore enhancement. You will find in those 3rd edition resources a skill called Baleful Gaze. With it, any non-devil that sees the unmasked face of a Narzugon sees their own worst fears reflected in the fiend's burning eyes, causing the victim to become shaken. Positioned as a gaze attack in 3rd edition, I prefer to have it simply be part of the lore as opposed to something that the Narzugon might actively do in combat, but you may wish to utilize that differently or ignore the lore altogether. I just so happen to love the flavor of it for my table. And secondly, of course the image your mind conjures upon hearing the words Narzugon or Hell Knight is likely that flaming knight striding upon its fiery nightmare steed. That is the presented stereotype. And while it is true that Narzugons most often have nightmares as their steeds, you might be surprised to learn that there exist many accounts of Narzugon bonding with other fell beasts as they ride across the plains on their errands of evil. Just some known examples include fell mammoths found in the icy wastes of Cania or mire drakes in the swamps of Mineros. The best part is that this lore opens up and provides a canonical precedent for creating your own homebrew Hell Knight mounts, ones that best fit your campaign or world. But regardless of their chosen mount, the Narzugon are rarely, if ever, encountered without their trusted steeds. These fierce creatures were captured, tamed, and bonded with the devil for all time. If we brush aside those 4th edition behavior modifications, I actually like where the Narzugon sits in 5th edition. I feel they are one of the stronger fiends with which to build around and are certainly deserving of its number 5 ranking. Ranking just outside the top 3 and standing at a towering 12 feet is the Ice Devil, also known as the Geleugon, and I assure you he's not happy about this hierarchical ranking. And to be fair, he does have a legit complaint. At one time, back at the launch of 5th edition, the Ice Devil was the number 2 fiend in all the 9 hells, right behind and always looking for that promotion to Pit Fiend, and now he finds himself a distant 4th. And don't just blame Grilee for that. Wizards already bumped the Geleugon back another notch when they launched the Descent into Avernus update, which, spoiler alert, granted the Omnizu one of the more OP buffs in recent memory. More on that to come. Regardless, here in the frigid abyss of Khania, the Ice Devil still reigns as the merciless commanders of infernal armies within the 9 hells. Breaking the traditional devil mold, these cold-hearted commanders more closely resemble giant bipedal insects than traditional devils, their visage marked by multifaceted eyes, sharpened mandibles, and clawed appendages. Their imposing tails are covered in vicious spikes, both serving as a weapon and a sadistic tool for tormenting the weak. Weighing in at around 700 pounds, the Ice Devils present a formidable presence. With a 5th edition challenge rating of 14, averaging 180 hit points, possessing 3 melee attacks, plus a few skills like Wall of Ice, and of course the infernal ability to summon fiends to their aid, the Geleugons are no slouches in combat. Geleugons are also among the most ambitious of the fiends. Driven by an insatiable lust for power and promotion, they serve their Archdevil masters with a diligence that borders on obsession. Their ceaseless efforts are fueled by both the ambition and a deep-rooted fear, for failure is particularly costly for the Ice Devil. And it is here that I must delve into some obscure lore, as we have one of the most clear examples of a significant impact to established lore caused by the evolutionary changes made over time and version. In this case, specific to the Ice Devil and what was at one time detailed and codified lore on their promotion. Here we have established canonical lore that specifically outlines for us that the Ice Devil must perform perfect service for 777 years before any consideration of promotion, and that a single mistake resets that clock. The lore goes on to estimate that the average Geleugon goes through this reset process 9 times before achieving that level of perfection. That's potentially over 6 millennia before a promotion, and you thought your job was bad. Now, this requirement rests at the upper zenith of extremes, and that's due to the fact that at the time this lore was documented in the 3rd edition, the known and official hierarchy had these Ice Devils as just one step below the top-tier Pit Fiend. That is the ultimate afterlife goal for nearly every infernal devil, so such a difficult and final hurdle to reach the apex of ranks at least made some sense. But now we fast forward to 5th edition, and even that clearly outlined canon is now rife with conflict and really seems completely illogical. As previously mentioned, in the most recent canonical update found in the Descent to Avernus adventure, Geleugons are no longer number 2, canonically being bumped down by the Omnizu. So where are the extreme promotion requirements for the Omnizu, or any other devil that might find themselves in that second ranking, which would and should be equivalent in their exaggerated expectations in order for them to become a mighty Pit Fiend? The 5th edition lore simply ignores this contradiction, and that kind of makes one of the most extreme examples of promotion requirements seem ridiculous in context, both as unnecessary and certainly far less rewarding. So my advice is to either remove the extreme promotion-related lore altogether, as much as I like the color that it adds to my world, create new equivalent promotion requirements, or simply adopt the 777 years of perfection to whatever fiend occupies that lofty number 2 spot. I share this here for awareness, one, but most importantly to illustrate that while the canon is certainly interesting, it should only serve to inspire and enhance your world-building activities and never to shackle them. But seriously, those poor Ice Devils really took it on the mandible here. No wonder they are such angry and cruel taskmasters. Nonetheless, because of this, Geleugons despise weakness in others and view their underlings as expendable, treating them either as pawns in their malevolent schemes or as subjects of their cruel amusement. Despite their harsh leadership, Pit Fiends place immense trust in Ice Devils, particularly in the Fortress of Malsheen within Nessus, where they can be found guarding the sole entrance to Nessus from Khania, the 8th layer. The Gelugons are definitely on the roadmap for a full-blown profile. The Ice Devil is a formidable and intelligent devil that is perhaps not deserving of this double demotion. Much to the displeasure of the aforementioned Gelugons, the Omnizu land in our top 3, but for me they do so with a number of caveats and disclaimers. Of all the devil types we are coalescing and ranking today, the Omnizu are easily the most variable across their historical versions, and one I had a lot of trouble ranking this high with any confidence, clearly colored by my own experiences and history with these devils. While I do not dispute their canonical status as a greater devil in 5th edition, it was hard to reconcile the absolute power surge they have gained to anyone that played in any previous edition. But specifically looking at their empowerment from the 3rd edition, where they've risen from what now seems an almost comical challenge rating 7 devil to a challenge rating 18 powerhouse in 5th edition. So while the Omnizu end up with the Infernal Olympics bronze medal from Grilee, there is a not insignificant percentage of me that feels I let their massive and official 5e ascension influence my ranking. Truth be told, of course it did. The Omnizu were lesser fiends in previous versions, with as many as 10 or 11 devils ahead of them in the pecking order. Still, despite their questionable empowered status, just looking upon one, you would be forgiven for not taking these devils as seriously as one probably should, at least now, and that would be costly. If ever there was an infernal case of not judging a book by its cover, the Omnizu now certainly make that list. Usually standing under 5 feet tall with undersized baby bat wings and the devil version of a dad bod, these pudgy to obese, sickly green Omnizu look more like they belong in the next Ghostbusters reboot. But if you are playing with 5e stat blocks, take heed. As a 5th edition devil with an AC of 21, over 200 hit points, and as a spellcaster with a 20 intelligence, you'd only make that mistake once. And I can only imagine the shock of a former 3rd edition player running into one of these in a 5th edition game as they meander down the River Styx, from which these fiends get their less official name as Styx Devils. To make the case of justifying the Omnizu's extreme elevation, we need to lean heavily on the role and importance of these by-the-book and bureaucratic fiends who play 2 primary but important roles among the Barbazu. First, as overseers of all forms of traffic throughout the 9 hells, whether by the River Styx or among the many portals throughout hell, the Omnizu are ever watchful for improper and illegal travel or passage. Papers, please is a favored Omnizu phrase. Omnizu and or their direct reports formerly occupied checkpoints stationed every 10 miles along the River Styx, where travelers must stop in order to be registered in the massive tome ledgers that Omnizu all carry with them. Here they will gather the purpose of a traveler's visit, verify their travel approvals, and be subject to humiliating searches. Seriously, the TSA has nothing on these guys. And if any escaping souls happen to slip past their bureaucratic web, search parties will be formed to scour the plains, fugitive style, as Omnizu are relentless hunters who recognize no boundaries and delight in the thrill of the chase and the great prestige that capturing an errant soul can bring them. They will often employ the Orthons, apparently the new retcon bounty hunters of hell, and the wasp-like outlanders, the Advespa devils, among others, to assist in the hunt. Additionally, as the infernal accountants of Beator, Omnizu are also ever present during the intake of soul shells and the cataloging of those same souls as they reach the various torture stations for processing. In essence, the Omnizu devils are infernal bookkeepers, politicians, and magistrates, which to my way of thinking does not alone warrant such a boost in challenge rating. However, the Omnizu have always possessed an inflated sense of self, and despite their roles in the 9 hells, they absolutely resent taking orders or being second in anything. To that end, Omnizu are renowned for their constant plotting. Behind the facade of an obedient devil nerd with a bobbing head as they write in their thick infernal ledgers, An Omnizu's mind is always scheming on methods to eliminate its superior, gain its power, and rise in the hierarchy. And that got me thinking, perhaps the Omnizu have some scandalous materials on some heads at Wizbro, blackmailing those wizards in the ivory tower, which might well explain their crazy leap in power. Regardless, when not playing their role as the hall monitors of hell, they can be found in the shadows of infernal cities, brokering secret deals with night hags and the more covert and political of fiends to secure more souls and therefore more power. And it is for these reasons, and potentially the art of blackmail, that I'm forced to agree that what they may lack in physical appearance and role, they do potentially make up for in their diabolical influence and political maneuvering, resulting in this increased power and authority that begrudgingly a rank 3 devil gains. Amid a malodorous, choking mist looms the fetid presence of our number 2 ranked fiend. Like so many devils today introduced in the 3rd edition, and like only a few others not likely to ever see the light of day in current canonical lore. One of the more repulsive of devil kind, yet in my opinion also vastly underrated in terms of role-playing and world-building potential. A twisted and grotesque parody of both beauty and confidence, this behemoth devil towers over even the tallest of pit fiends, reaching up to 20 feet tall and breaking most any scale at over 2 tons. This is the rare and corpulent form of the Pailirion, also known as the Corruption Devil, and it is a fiend that never fails to make its presence known. As to why the Pailirion has not been brought forth to 5e, one can only speculate. But given their rich and storied lore, including some infamous named Pailirion devils and direct involvement across all the Outer Planes as an elite-level spy master, it's not because they're undeserving or insignificant. So I wonder what it could be. In a stark contrast to their physical appearance, Pailirions are often draped in an opulent and lavish facade, reminiscent of a courtesan's allure. Beneath black robes, barely containing its oversized cargo, you will find an obese and monstrous being. A fusion of the female form with just the wrong amount of amphibious-like traits and an ever-present oversized grin of garish red lipstick. The Corruption Devil wields a confusing level of charm that unnerves all who witness it. Despite its bulky frame, the Pailirion can even fly, moving with a clumsy grace as its vastly undersized Omnizu-like wings magically carry the devil of excess through the air, leaving a noxious, almost visible contrail of perfume-masked stench in its wake. Yet the Pailirion saunters forward with a level of self-confidence suggesting they do not own a mirror. And now, we likely know why Wizards has elected to leave this high-level fiend as a forgotten remnant of another time. But once, if, you get past the visuals, beneath the odious exterior lies one of the most cunning and manipulative intellects across the Outer Planes. Pailirion devils are the not-so-subtle masterminds of fiendish kind, supremely weaving intricate webs of deceit and corruption that reverberate throughout the 9 hells, the Outer Planes, and even the prime material world. They are expert in all forms of subterfuge, especially political blackmail and extortion, where the Pailirion will use their vast network of spies and informants to uncover the darkest secrets of mortals and fiends alike. With this knowledge, they manipulate their mortal victims, luring them into Faustian bargains that bind their souls to the infernal realm. They are shrewd judges of talent and see every creature as a potential pawn in the grand schemes they are constantly plotting, always thinking several moves ahead. While native to the 9 hells, the Pailirion devils are renowned for having multiple lairs hidden across the Outer Planes, each an opulent haven filled with treasures and oddities, the residue of their success in acquiring wealth and power. However, meeting one in person is no easy feat. Pailirions rarely reveal themselves directly, preferring to operate through intermediaries. They only intervene personally when their plans are threatened, then using their formidable powers to ensure their schemes are followed through. Their influence is such that even the archdevils themselves are not immune to their eavesdropping and manipulation, most certainly a dangerous liaison, but one the Pailirion excels in. As a challenge rating 18 fiend with over 240 hit points in the 3rd edition, they are certainly a worthy adversary with a number of powerfully unique skills. From unleashing their own empowered version of vicious mockery called Belittle to a debilitating mind-fogging spell called Intoxicating Perfume, along with a whole host of spells including powers to charm, summon, devastate, and teleport. However, their preference is to avoid direct confrontation unless absolutely necessary. They see combat as undignified and beneath their status. And you will likely never catch a Polarion alone anyway, as they routinely surround themselves with sycophantic underlings and expendable muscle, usually in the form of many Horned Devil bodyguards. The Corruption Devil also has a roster of infiltrating agents at their disposal, ranging from lowly Spinagons used for basic spying, Indwelling Devils for more serious covert activities, all the way up to elite groups of Assassin Devils used for tasks more in the class of political upheaval and eliminations. While Polarions are known to serve various archdevils, it is in the infernal court of Glazia, Archduchess of Malebranche and daughter of Asmodeus, that they find particular favor. In fact, Polarions make up the majority of nobility in Glazia's court, confirming the daughter of Asmodeus' known desire and disposition to have abhorrent-looking fiends in her service that only amplify her own vanity. The Polarion is a case study reminder that even in the realms of the Nine Hells, knowledge and influence, when wielded properly, is the most powerful weapon of all. And I've just barely scratched the surface of these complex fiends. Heck, we've yet to even talk about their corrupted minions, and some of the more notable and infamous Polarions and their stories. Of all the fiends we're profiling today, the Polarion is the one most deserving of a dedicated video, but until then just know that a CR-18 Polarion no doubt belongs among the greater devils in the infernal hierarchy, most likely shunned in the 5th edition far more for reasons of public relations and appearance than any lack of power, ability, or lore. We have finally arrived to the least surprising number 1 reveal ever, but that's for good reason. I may have taken some liberties at the bottom of the hierarchy with the Kalabon, but can you imagine the hell I would catch, pun intended, if I were to try and unseat the apex of rank-and-file infernal authority? You have heard throughout these discoveries Grilee's best effort and alleged first-hand accounts of the many infernal fiends, all in an effort to reconcile the many conflicts and contradictions that exist from the earliest codices of lore to the most modern mortal authored tomes. Yet in the scorching furnace of the Nine Hells, the Pit Fiend still stands as the enduring symbol of infernal majesty, and I do not see that changing anytime soon. First introduced on page 23 of the 1977 Monster Manual, the Pit Fiend is by almost any measure the physical embodiment of the supreme form of a devil, often exceeding 13 feet in height and closing in on 1,000 pounds. Fierce devil warriors, their bodies are armored in scales that ignite with their rage as massive regal wings wrap around their fearsome forms and their fangs drip venomous toxins. Depending upon your chosen lore, Pit Fiends were created through countless millennia of servitude in various other fiendish forms, rising in the ranks like the Archdevil Bel, all culminating in a 1001-day promotion and cleansing of hellfire torment in the Pit of Flames in Phlegethos. Or alternatively, each was born from a single drop of blood from Asmodeus. Either way, these arrogant and majestic fiends are fiercely loyal to the Lord of Lies, and possess a near-perfect lawful understanding of their infernal nature, rejecting chaos in favor of a self-entitled narcissism and tyrannical intelligence. The mind of the Pit Fiend holds an intimate comprehension of the strictures of the Nine Hells, which they masterfully manipulate to exploit their own dark agendas or those of their archdevil masters. As the nobility of the rank and file, Pit Fiends occupy positions of immense trust and power, ruling over legions of lesser devils and enforcing the infernal laws across entire domains of the archdevils. In fact, generally speaking, the Pit Fiend answers only to those named archdevils, dukes, and duchesses of hell they serve, often as their closest advisors. And their influence extends beyond hell's borders, whether they are commanding legions of fiends in the Blood War, acting as generals and trusted advisors, or simply striking deals with powerful mortals on the material plane. When it's time for combat, every part of a Pit Fiend is a weapon, from their venomous infectious bite and physical prowess to their mastery of fire, powerful auras, and their advanced combat intelligence. Pit Fiends wield devastating magic, paralyzing foes, turning invisible, and summoning other devils to their aid. And yet, amid all this grandeur and dread lies the paradox that is their only true weakness: their unbridled hubris, their utter inability to consider failure, a weakness that often sends them hurtling towards the most powerful foes to prove their indomitable might, despite any calculated odds not falling in their favor. Digging deep into the obscure lore, you might be surprised to learn that Pit Fiends have another trait that one might suggest can be turned into a weakness. Pit Fiends, all of them, have an excessive, meticulous, perhaps even OCD-level obsession when it comes to the attention to detail. They take pride in their appearance, ensuring that their armor and weaponry are always in pristine condition before battle, and have been known at times to overthink battle strategies in the Blood War in instances where timing was clearly the more critical factor. This fastidious disposition is a reflection, in fact a natural byproduct, of the purging of chaos resulting from their promotion and the pure lawful character that is the manifestation of the Pit Fiend form, one that emphasizes order and control above all else. The Pit Fiend is the embodiment of every mortal's own nightmare vision of the word devil, and their presence is a sign of the nine hells' might and the tyrannical doctrine of lawful, ordered evil. And that is the full hierarchy of the 9 hells. In support of this video, I have a full, nearly 30-page PDF on Hell's Hierarchy over on my Patreon. In it you will find not only this hierarchy and supporting images, detailed descriptions, and points of interest on each of the 9 layers, and lore summaries for almost 70 devils in total, plus pages of thematic homebrew content on these infernal fiends. The supplement in this video were a ton of research and effort, and I'd really appreciate if you consider supporting the work at the links below. Free Patreon memberships, free Discord access, and buy me a coffee donation link. Thanks for listening, and until next time, remember, the only limitation at your table is your imagination.